I've always been someone who says yes to small favors without thinking too hard about it. Not because I'm particularly generous, more that it's easier than making excuses. If someone asks for something that won't cost me much time or effort, I'll generally just do it. That tendency has worked out fine over the years, helping friends move, looking after pets, providing references, normal, helpful acts that most people do without incident. I work as a speech and language therapist in Wolverhampton, mostly with children who have communication difficulties. I've been doing it for about 9 years now, working through a clinic that serves several schools in the area. I live alone, in a small terrace house. Nothing remarkable, the sort of settled but unexciting life that probably describes plenty of people my age. I'd never thought of my willingness to help as a vulnerability, just a normal part of being reasonably decent. About a year ago, I was contacted by someone claiming to represent a parents' advocacy organization. They'd found my details through the clinic where I work and wanted to ask if I'd be willing to provide a brief testimonial about the importance of early intervention for children with speech delays. They were putting together a campaign to raise awareness and secure better funding for therapy services, and they wanted to include perspectives from professionals working directly with affected families. The request came via email and seemed legitimate enough. The organization's name was something generic but plausible: Parents United for Communication Support, or something similar. The email was professionally written, explained their goals clearly, and the request itself seemed entirely reasonable. They wanted a short video testimonial, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, where I'd talk about the impact that proper therapy can have on children's development and why adequate funding matters. I'm generally skeptical of unsolicited requests, but this one felt appropriate to my role. Advocacy for better therapeutic services is something I genuinely believe in, and the request wasn't asking for anything that seemed problematic. Just my professional opinion about work I do anyway, recorded in a format that could be shared with policymakers or included in awareness campaigns. The sort of thing that many professionals in my field have done at some point. I responded saying I'd be happy to provide a testimonial, and they sent back detailed instructions about what to include and how to record it. They wanted me to speak naturally about my work, mention specific challenges I'd seen families face due to inadequate access to services, and emphasize the difference that early intervention can make. They suggested I record it in my home rather than at the clinic, to make it feel more personal and less formally clinical. The instructions specified that I should introduce myself with my full name and professional role, so viewers would understand my credentials. They wanted me to mention where I worked and how long I'd been practicing, again for credibility. They suggested filming in a comfortable setting, maybe in my living room or somewhere that felt relaxed rather than office-like. The goal was to come across as authentic and personally invested, rather than reading from a script in a professional environment. I spent an evening recording the testimonial according to their guidelines. It took a few attempts to get something I was happy with. Speaking naturally to a camera feels more awkward than you'd expect, and I wanted to sound professional but not overly rehearsed. I talked about working with children who struggle to communicate, the frustration families experience when they can't access adequate support, and the transformative impact that proper therapy can have when it's available early enough. In the final version, I introduced myself by name, mentioned I'd been a speech and language therapist for 9 years, stated where I worked, and spoke for about 3 minutes about the importance of early intervention and proper funding. I filmed it in my living room, as suggested, trying to create the warm personal atmosphere they'd requested. I thought it came across as genuine and professionally credible, the sort of testimonial that might actually be useful for an advocacy campaign. I uploaded the video through a link they'd provided and received a thank you email shortly afterward. They said the testimonial was exactly what they needed and would be included in materials they were preparing for distribution to policymakers and funding bodies. They mentioned my contribution would help make a real difference in securing better services for children like those I worked with. It felt good, honestly. A small effort that might contribute to something meaningful. I didn't think about the testimonial again for several months. It had been a minor thing, an evening's work that I'd done, because it aligned with my professional values, and because saying no would have required more energy than simply doing what they'd asked. The organization never contacted me again, which seemed fine. Presumably, they'd used the testimonial in whatever campaign they'd been planning and moved on. Then, about 6 months after I'd recorded it, a colleague mentioned she'd seen something online that looked like me, but in a context she found confusing. She'd been searching for information about therapeutic services and stumbled across a video featuring someone who looked exactly like me, speaking in my voice, but saying things that didn't quite match what she knew about my work or views. She thought perhaps I'd done an interview she wasn't aware of, but some of the content seemed odd. When she described what she'd seen, I didn't immediately connect it to the testimonial I'd recorded. But something about her description made me uneasy, so I asked her to send me the link if she came across it again. She found it that same afternoon and forwarded it to me with a message saying she'd definitely been right that it was strange. The video she'd found was professionally edited and appeared to be a promotional advertisement for private speech therapy services. It featured footage of me, clearly taken from the testimonial I'd recorded, but edited in ways that completely changed the context and meaning of what I'd said. Individual sentences had been extracted and rearranged, paired with text and imagery that made it seem like I was endorsing a specific private practice and criticizing NHS services. The editing was sophisticated enough that the transitions felt natural if you weren't paying close attention. My voice remained consistent, the visual cuts were smooth, and the overall presentation made it seem like I'd intentionally recorded an endorsement for these private services. Someone watching casually would have no reason to suspect it wasn't genuine, particularly since I'd introduced myself by name and professional credentials exactly as the original instructions had specified. I was immediately angry and disturbed by this misuse of footage I'd provided in good faith. I contacted the parents' advocacy organization using the email address they'd originally reached out from, demanding they remove the edited video and explain how my testimonial had ended up being used for commercial purposes. The email bounced back as undeliverable. I tried searching for the organization online and found nothing. No website, no social media presence, no record of their existence beyond the emails they'd sent me. I reported the misuse to the private practice that appeared to be benefiting from the promotional video. They claimed they'd commissioned the video from a marketing company and had no knowledge that the testimonial wasn't genuine. They removed it from their website, but said they'd pay good money for professional promotional content and were as much victims of deception as I was. That should have been the end of it, an unpleasant experience of being deceived and having my professional credibility misused, but resolved once the immediate misuse was addressed. Except a few weeks later, my colleague found another video featuring the same footage of me, this time edited differently and appearing on a completely unrelated website advertising therapeutic services in a different region. Over the following months, my testimonial footage appeared in dozens of different contexts, sometimes promoting private therapy services, sometimes in advertisements for educational products, occasionally in materials for organizations whose purposes I couldn't even identify. Each time the editing was different, my words rearranged and recontextualized to serve whatever purpose the current user needed. my face and voice, speaking with apparent professional authority, endorsing things I'd never heard of and didn't support. I reported each instance I discovered, but they appeared faster than I could track them. The testimonial footage had clearly been sold or distributed to multiple parties who were using it for various commercial purposes. My introduction, stating my name, professional role, workplace, and credentials, made the footage particularly valuable because viewers would perceive me as a credible authority endorsing whatever product or service was being advertised. Then I received a message from someone claiming they'd found my testimonial footage for sale on the dark web. They were a journalist investigating deceptive marketing practices and had discovered a marketplace where professional testimonial footage was being sold to businesses wanting to create credible-seeming endorsements without actually hiring genuine professionals or seeking authentic testimonials. She showed me the listing where my footage was available. It was on a marketplace organized like a professional stock footage library, with categories for different professions and types of testimonials. My footage was listed under healthcare professionals, described as a genuine speech therapist providing credible endorsement content that could be edited for various purposes. The listing included the raw footage I'd originally recorded, allowing buyers to edit it however they wanted for their specific needs. It emphasized my credentials and authentic presentation, marketing the footage as valuable specifically because I'd introduced myself with real details that made edited versions appear legitimate. The price was substantial, around several £100s for unlimited editing rights, marketed as a bargain compared to hiring an actual professional to record testimonials. The purchase history showed my footage had been bought by over 40 different accounts. 40 separate buyers had paid for the right to edit my testimonial into whatever promotional content suited their purposes. Each one could create unlimited variations, rearranging my words and pairing them with whatever imagery or text advanced their commercial interests. The journalist explained that this type of testimonial farming was increasingly common. Scammers would create fake organizations or causes that sounded legitimate, request testimonials from professionals who wanted to support apparently worthy purposes, then sell the resulting footage on dark web marketplaces to businesses engaged in deceptive advertising. The professionals who'd recorded testimonials rarely discovered the misuse, and when they did, the distributed nature of the content made it nearly impossible to fully address. She'd been investigating after several other professionals contacted her about similar experiences: speech therapists, medical professionals, educators, anyone whose credentials made them valuable endorsers for products or services. All of them had been deceived into recording testimonials for fake organizations, only to have their footage sold and misused extensively. I contacted a solicitor about potential legal action, but the situation was complicated by the distributed nature of the misuse and the difficulty of identifying who was actually responsible. The fake organization that had requested my testimonial didn't exist in any traceable form. The buyers on the dark web marketplace were anonymous. The individual businesses using edited versions of my testimonial could claim they'd purchased what they believed was legitimate promotional content and weren't responsible for the deceptive acquisition. The journalist published an article about testimonial farming that included my story alongside several others. The publicity led to some of the more prominent misuses being removed, but I knew the footage itself still existed in the collections of people who downloaded it before marketplaces were shut down or moved to new locations. My testimonial could still appear in new contexts indefinitely, edited in ways I'd never see and used for purposes I'd never approve of. What made it particularly violating was understanding how the deception had worked. They'd specifically requested I film at home to make it feel personal and authentic, which also meant the footage showed details of my living space. They'd asked me to introduce myself with my full name and credentials to establish credibility, which made edited versions seem authoritative. They'd suggested I speak naturally about my work, which provided hours of raw footage that could be chopped up and rearranged into almost any message they wanted to create. I'd willingly provided everything they needed to create convincing false endorsements of products and services I knew nothing about. My desire to help what I believed was a worthy cause, my tendency to say yes to reasonable-sounding requests, had been deliberately exploited to turn me into an unknowing spokesperson for commercial interests I'd never chosen to support. The psychological impact went beyond just anger at being deceived. Every time I introduce myself professionally now, every time I speak about my work, I wonder if someone might recognize me from one of the edited testimonials and assume I actually endorse whatever product or service they'd seen me appearing to promote. My professional credibility, which I'd spent years building, had been weaponized without my consent and used in ways that could potentially damage the reputation I depended on. I also think about the 40 unknown buyers who purchased my testimonial footage. Who were they? What products or services did they use my image to promote? How many people saw versions of me endorsing things I'd never heard of, believing I genuinely recorded those testimonials? The journalist's investigation suggested the testimonial farming operation had collected footage from over 200 professionals before being exposed, meaning thousands of deceptive advertisements had been created using stolen credibility. The organization that had originally contacted me was never identified or prosecuted. The marketplace where my footage was sold was shut down, but apparently resurfaced elsewhere shortly afterward. The individual buyers who'd purchased my testimonial remained anonymous, protected by the architecture of dark web transactions that made tracing specific users nearly impossible, without extensive resources and cooperation that rarely materialized. I'm much more careful now. I question motivations more thoroughly, research organizations more extensively before agreeing to participate in anything. But I also know the damage is already done. My testimonial footage exists in collections I'll never access, potentially still being edited into new promotional content. My face and voice continuing to endorse things I've never agreed to support. That's what I think about now when I see professional testimonials in advertisements. Not whether the person genuinely believes what they're saying, but whether they actually said it at all, whether their footage was stolen through deceptive requests and edited to serve purposes they'd never approved, whether that credible-seeming healthcare professional or educator actually recorded that endorsement, or whether someone like me was tricked into providing raw material that was later manipulated into whatever message served commercial interests. I tried to help what I believed was a worthy cause by recording a simple testimonial about work I genuinely cared about. That willingness to help was systematically exploited to turn me into an unknowing spokesperson for dozens of products and services I'd never endorsed. My professional credibility became a commodity sold to the highest bidders, my face and voice repurposed endlessly for commercial gains I'd never share in, and purposes I'd never chosen. The testimonial footage exists. Somewhere online, my edited image continues appearing in contexts I'll never see, endorsing things I'd never support, speaking words I never said to serve interests I'd never approve of. That's the lasting price of one evening spent trying to help. One small favor that seemed entirely reasonable at the time, but turned out to be exactly the vulnerability someone was looking for. I'd always been competitive with puzzles and problem-solving games. the sort of person who couldn't resist a Sudoku or crossword that others had given up on. My mates used to joke that I should try those online puzzle competitions where people solve increasingly difficult challenges for prize money. But I never thought I was good enough for that level of competition. That changed when I was 25 and unemployed in Leeds, spending most days applying for teaching jobs that never materialized while living off savings that were rapidly dwindling. The job market for history teachers was brutal, and I was starting to consider completely different career paths when something happened that made me realize my puzzle-solving hobby might actually be worth something. I'd been working through some logic problems on a free puzzle website when a message appeared offering access to more challenging content if I was interested in testing my skills against harder material. The invitation seemed automated, probably triggered by my completion time or accuracy rate, but it led to a section of the site I hadn't seen before. The puzzles there were considerably more complex than anything I'd encountered on mainstream puzzle platforms. Not just mathematical problems or logic games, but challenges that required research, pattern recognition across multiple data sources, and the sort of analytical thinking that goes beyond casual entertainment. Some challenges involved analyzing communication patterns in large datasets. Others required identifying connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information, and a few demanded the kind of systematic investigation that reminded me of historical research methods I'd learned during my degree. The difficulty level was addictive. These weren't puzzles you could solve in a few minutes during a coffee break, but genuine intellectual challenges that required hours of focused analysis and creative problem-solving approaches. More importantly, the platform offered small payments for successfully completing certain challenges. Nothing substantial, but enough to make the time investment feel worthwhile when I wasn't earning anything through conventional job applications. Over several weeks, I worked through increasingly difficult challenges, earning modest amounts that helped offset my unemployment while keeping my analytical skills sharp during a period when I wasn't getting much intellectual stimulation. The challenges gradually shifted from abstract logic problems to tasks that involved analyzing real-world information. Some required researching public records and identifying patterns in business registrations. Others involved tracking information flow through social media platforms or news reporting. The analytical work was genuinely engaging, combining the satisfaction of puzzle solving with research skills that were directly relevant to my historical training. It felt like productive use of my education during a time when my actual qualifications weren't leading to employment opportunities. But as the challenges became more complex and better paid, they also started requiring access to information sources that weren't available through normal internet browsing. The platform provided specialized software that could access databases and information networks that weren't indexed by standard search engines. The research challenges using these alternative information sources were considerably more interesting than anything I'd worked on before. Instead of analyzing sanitized datasets or public information, I was working with raw communication logs, unfiltered social media activity, and comprehensive records that showed how information actually moved through digital networks. The analytical challenges required understanding not just what information was being shared, but how different groups used various platforms to coordinate activities, spread influence, and maintain privacy while conducting business or personal activities. Some challenges focused on identifying key influencers in specific online communities. Others involved mapping relationships between apparently unconnected individuals or organizations, and a few required analyzing the effectiveness of different communication strategies for achieving particular goals. The work was intellectually stimulating and felt like legitimate research that could potentially be valuable for academic or professional purposes. I was developing data analysis skills that might be relevant for future employment while earning enough to cover basic living expenses. But I also started noticing that some challenges involved analyzing information about people and organizations in Yorkshire, including details about businesses and individuals in Leeds and surrounding areas that I was familiar with from living in the region. The research wasn't focused on abstract or distant subjects, but was systematically analyzing real people and activities in my immediate geographic area. Some challenges required identifying vulnerabilities in local business operations. Others involved mapping social connections between specific individuals, and a few focused on analyzing personal communication patterns that revealed private information about real people's relationships and activities. I realized that my analytical work wasn't contributing to academic research or legitimate business intelligence, but was being used to compile detailed information about Yorkshire residents for purposes that weren't clearly explained. The puzzle-solving platform seemed to be using gamified challenges to recruit people with analytical skills for conducting systematic research into real people's private lives and business activities. When I questioned the purpose of the more invasive research challenges, the platform explained that understanding social and business networks was essential for various legitimate purposes, including market research, academic studies, and security analysis. They assured me that all information was obtained through legal sources and that my analytical work was contributing to legitimate research rather than harmful activities. But the analytical challenges continued becoming more specifically targeted at Yorkshire residents, with increasing focus on gathering detailed intelligence about specific individuals' personal circumstances, business relationships, and private activities. Some challenges required analyzing people's financial situations based on their digital footprints. Others involved identifying personal vulnerabilities that could be exploited for various purposes. And a few focused on mapping family relationships and social connections that could be used to influence or manipulate specific individuals. I started recognizing that the research I was conducting involved some people I knew personally from around Leeds, including detailed analysis of their private communications, business activities, and personal relationships. The puzzle platform wasn't just collecting abstract information about Yorkshire residents, but was systematically profiling real people I encountered in my daily life, using my analytical skills to compile intelligence that could be used for manipulation, harassment, or exploitation. My competitive puzzle-solving hobby had been exploited to recruit me for conducting surveillance research on my own community, with the intellectual satisfaction of challenging analytical work being used to overcome ethical concerns about systematic invasion of privacy. I tried to investigate what was being done with the analytical research I'd been conducting, following the specialized software connections to discover where my intelligence reports were being distributed and used. The investigation led to online communities that operated outside normal internet infrastructure, where detailed personal information about UK residents was being traded and analyzed for various purposes that range from targeted advertising to systematic harassment. The analytical intelligence I'd been providing through puzzle challenges was being used by these communities to develop comprehensive profiles of Yorkshire residents that could be used for financial exploitation, personal manipulation, or coordinated harassment campaigns. Some community participants specialized in using personal intelligence for systematic psychological manipulation of selected targets, while others focused on financial exploitation or identity theft based on detailed knowledge of people's circumstances and vulnerabilities. The research skills I developed through historical training and puzzle solving were being used to facilitate systematic harm to real people in my own community, with the intellectual challenge of analytical work being used to disguise surveillance activities as legitimate research. When I attempted to stop participating in the platform challenges, I discovered that my analytical work had already provided enough intelligence about Yorkshire residents to make withdrawal complicated, without risking exposure of activities I'd inadvertently supported. The platform made it clear that my research contributions had been valuable enough that they preferred continued cooperation, rather than dealing with complications that might arise if I attempted to expose their data collection activities. They suggested that ongoing participation in analytical challenges would be considerably less problematic than attempting to report activities that I'd already provided substantial research support for implementing. The competitive puzzle solving that had seemed like productive use of my analytical skills during unemployment had made me complicit in systematic surveillance activities affecting real people in my own community. I never found safe methods for extracting myself from involvement with the platform, or for warning Yorkshire residents who were being profiled using intelligence I'd helped compile through analytical challenges. The puzzle platform continues operating. The systematic analysis of UK residents continues expanding, and people continue having their personal information collected and distributed through gamified research challenges that exploit competitive instincts and intellectual curiosity. I eventually found teaching work through conventional job applications, but the analytical research I'd conducted during unemployment continues being used to facilitate systematic targeting of Yorkshire residents who have no idea their personal information was collected through puzzle-solving activities. The intellectual challenge that had seemed like productive use of my historical research skills turned out to be recruitment for comprehensive surveillance activities affecting real people in my own community, with competitive puzzle solving being used to overcome ethical resistance to systematic invasion of privacy. My analytical contributions continue being used to harm vulnerable individuals throughout Yorkshire, while the platform continues recruiting unemployed graduates who believe they're developing valuable research skills rather than providing intelligence for systematic exploitation disguised as challenging intellectual work. The first parcel arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I almost didn't accept it because I hadn't ordered anything. I was finishing my third year studying psychology at Manchester, living alone in a studio flat above a chippy on Wilmslow Road, the sort of place where the smell of vinegar soaked into everything and the radiators clanged all night, but it was cheap and walking distance from campus, perfect for a student budget stretched to breaking point. The delivery driver was holding a small brown package about the size of a paperback book with my name and address printed on a generic white label. No return address, no company logo, nothing to indicate where it had come from. When I told him I hadn't ordered anything, he just shrugged and said it was already paid for, so I might as well take it. Inside was a mobile phone, not a smartphone. Just one of those basic Nokia models you'd see in petrol stations, the kind drug dealers supposedly used because they were harder to trace. It was switched on, fully charged, with a single number saved in the contacts list under the name Service. I should have thrown it away immediately, should have reported it to the police, or at least asked my neighbours if they'd received anything similar. Instead, I did what any curious student would do. I googled the phone's model number and tried to work out where it might have come from. That's how I ended up on the dark web for the first time. One search led to another, and before I knew it, I was reading about anonymous communication methods and untraceable delivery services. The deeper I dug, the more references I found to something called physical drop protocols, ways of getting items to specific people without leaving any digital fingerprints. The phone sat on my desk for 3 days before it rang. I was eating breakfast, scrolling through lecture notes, when the Nokia started buzzing across the wooden surface. The caller ID just showed service. I stared at it for maybe 10 rings before curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. No one spoke. There was background noise, traffic maybe, or machinery, but no voice. After about 30 seconds, the line went dead. When I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail. No greeting, just silence, and then the beep. That night, I found the website. It wasn't easy to locate. I'd been browsing hidden sites for hours, following links that led to more links, most of which were broken or led to placeholder pages. But eventually, I stumbled across something called Direct Physical Services, a page with minimal text and a simple contact form. The description was deliberately vague. Something about bridging digital anonymity with real-world requirements and providing discrete solutions for complex delivery needs. There was a phone number listed at the bottom of the page, the same number that was saved in the Nokia's contacts. I spent the next few hours exploring related sites, trying to piece together what this service actually did. From what I could gather, it was some sort of courier operation that specialized in anonymous deliveries. People would request items through the hidden website, pay through untraceable methods, and then receive packages with no identifying information about the sender. Mostly, it seemed to be used for things that weren't quite illegal, but weren't exactly legitimate either. Rare books that might have been stolen from libraries, prescription medications that didn't require prescriptions, personal documents that someone shouldn't have had access to, the kind of grey area transactions that people preferred to keep off the normal internet. But there were darker hints too, references to biological samples and personal effects that suggested the service wasn't limited to simple package delivery. Some of the site's clients seemed to be requesting very specific items from very specific people, as if they had inside knowledge of their target's routines and possessions. The Nokia rang again on Friday evening. This time, when I answered, there was a voice. Male, middle-aged, with a London accent that had been carefully modulated to sound nondescript. He asked if I was satisfied with the service so far. And when I said I didn't understand what service he was referring to, he chuckled softly. He explained that I'd been selected as a distribution point for their operation. Parcels would be delivered to my address, and I would be responsible for passing them on to their final recipients. In exchange, I'd receive a small commission for each successful handover, enough to cover rent for a few months, he suggested. When I started to protest that I hadn't signed up for anything, he cut me off gently. He said my browsing history suggested I'd already shown interest in their services, and my address had been verified as suitable for their requirements. If I wasn't interested in participating, I could simply ignore future deliveries, but the initial phone was mine to keep regardless. Then he hung up, leaving me staring at the Nokia and wondering how anyone could know what websites I'd been visiting. I used the university's internet connection, which should have provided some level of anonymity, but apparently that wasn't enough to stay completely hidden. The second parcel arrived the following Monday. This one was larger, maybe the size of a shoebox, and significantly heavier. The same generic labeling, the same anonymous delivery driver, who seemed surprised when I questioned him about the sender. When I opened it in my flat, I found a collection of items that made no immediate sense together. There was a house key, still warm from being recently cut, a small digital camera, the kind used for security systems, a manila envelope containing what looked like bank statements and utility bills for someone I'd never heard of, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a lock of dark hair tied with a piece of string. The implications were disturbing. Someone had paid to have these items collected and delivered, but the combination suggested something much more invasive than a simple theft. The bank statements were recent, from a Barclays branch in South Manchester. The utility bills covered the same address. The key looked like it belonged to a front door, but it was the hair that really unsettled me. It wasn't the kind you'd get from a hairbrush or a pillow. It had been cut deliberately, all the same length, as if someone had taken it while the owner was unconscious or restrained. I should have called the police then. Should have handed over everything and explained about the phone and the website and the strange service that seemed to be operating out of my address. Instead, I found myself back on the dark web, trying to understand what I'd gotten involved with. The Direct Physical Services website had changed. There were new sections now, accessible only through specific links that hadn't been there before. One was labeled Active Collections and contained a list of items currently being sourced. Most were vague: personal documentation from target residents or biological verification material. But some were terrifyingly specific. One request was for recent photographs from family home, kitchen area preferred. Another wanted clothing items worn within last 48 hours unwashed. There was even a listing for spare house keys copied from originals, North Manchester postcodes only. What made it worse was realizing that some of these requests had completion dates in the past, items that had already been collected and delivered. The parcel sitting on my desk was just one of many that had passed through this network, and I was apparently part of a much larger operation than I'd understood. The phone rang again that evening, but this time I didn't answer. It kept ringing though, every few hours throughout the night. Always the same caller ID, always the same patient buzzing until it reached voicemail. By morning, there were dozens of missed calls logged in the phone's memory. When I finally picked up, the voice was less friendly than before. He asked why I hadn't acknowledged receipt of the second delivery, and when I said I wasn't comfortable with the arrangement, he reminded me that I'd already accepted payment for services rendered. The phone itself was worth more than £50, he pointed out, and keeping it without fulfilling my obligations would constitute theft. More importantly, he added, my address was now registered in their system as an active distribution point. Other clients depended on the reliability of their network, and disappointing them would have consequences that extended beyond simple financial penalties. When I asked what he meant by consequences, he described my daily routine in uncomfortable detail. The time I left for lectures, the route I took to campus, the coffee shop where I usually stopped for lunch. He knew about my part-time job at the campus library, my weekend visits to the Arndale Centre, even the fact that I ordered takeaway from the same Indian restaurant every Thursday night. The message was clear. They'd been watching me long enough to know everything about my life, and that information could be used against me if I decided not to cooperate. The third parcel arrived on Wednesday, and this time I knew I had to get rid of it without looking inside. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when you're already involved in something you don't fully understand. The package was smaller than the others, about the size of a jewelry box, but it was cold to the touch and seemed to contain liquid of some kind. Inside was a small glass vial filled with what looked like blood, dark red, slightly congealed, with a medical label stuck to the side that showed a name and date from just 2 days earlier. There was also a printed sheet with what appeared to be test results, blood type, DNA markers, other medical information that I didn't fully understand, but that looked official and recent. Someone had paid to have blood samples collected and analyzed, then delivered to my address for distribution to a third party. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't just about stealing personal belongings or copying keys. Someone was harvesting biological material from unwilling victims. I tried calling the number on the Nokia to demand an explanation, but it went straight to a recorded message. The voice was the same one I'd spoken to before, but now it was reciting an address in Moss Side and instructing me to deliver the package by 6 o'clock that evening. If I failed to complete the delivery on time, there would be additional charges applied to my account. What account? I'd never agreed to any financial arrangement, never signed any contracts or provided payment information. But apparently, that didn't matter. In their system, I was already committed to seeing this through. The address in Moss Side turned out to be a laundrette, the kind of place that stayed open late and asked no questions about who was washing what. When I arrived with the package, there was a woman waiting by the change machine, early 30s, nervous looking, constantly checking her watch and glancing towards the door. She approached me as soon as I walked in, asking if I was there for the collection. When I handed over the package, she seemed relieved but also frightened, as if she was expecting something much worse than a small glass vial. She left immediately, without saying anything else, but I noticed she threw the package into a bin outside rather than keeping it. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one caught up in this system. The woman had been just as scared as I was, probably coerced into participating through the same combination of threats and surveillance that had trapped me. We were all just links in a chain that none of us fully understood. The Nokia rang as I was walking back to my flat. This time, the voice was congratulating me on a successful delivery and explaining that my commission would be processed within the next few days. When I asked how they planned to pay me, considering they had no banking information, he laughed and said payment would come in the form of continued personal security. As long as I cooperated with their requests, he explained, I would remain safe from the various unpleasant individuals who use their services. But if I decided to stop participating or involve the authorities, those same individuals would be provided with detailed information about my involvement in their operations. I was trapped. Even if I went to the police, how could I explain my role without admitting to handling stolen property and biological samples? And who would believe that I'd been forced into it by anonymous phone calls and untraceable deliveries? The parcels kept coming after that, usually 1 or 2 per week, always containing items that someone shouldn't have had access to. House keys and alarm codes, medical records and prescription bottles, personal photographs and pieces of jewelry that looked like family heirlooms. Each delivery came with specific instructions about where and when to hand over the package. Sometimes it was normal places, coffee shops, bus stations, shopping centers. But increasingly, it was locations that felt designed to isolate and intimidate. Abandoned buildings, empty car parks, the sorts of places where you wouldn't want to be caught alone at night. The people collecting the packages were getting stranger too. Not just nervous civilians like the woman at the laundrette, but individuals who seemed more comfortable with the criminal aspects of the operation. People who looked at me like they were memorizing my face for future reference. I tried to break the cycle several times, ignoring phone calls, refusing deliveries, even going so far as to leave Manchester for a long weekend to see if distance would make a difference. But they always found ways to bring me back into compliance. When I ignored calls, they started leaving voicemails with increasingly personal information about my family back in Liverpool. When I refused a delivery, the driver simply left the package outside my door where anyone could have taken it. When I left town, I returned to find evidence that someone had been inside my flat. Nothing stolen, just small changes that proved they had access whenever they wanted it. The breaking point came when I received a package that contained my own belongings. It was things from my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, a watch my grandfather had given me, photographs from school trips, even a diary I'd written when I was 14. Items that should have been safely locked away in Liverpool, not sitting in an anonymous parcel delivered to my address in Manchester. The message was unmistakable. They could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime they wanted. My participation wasn't really optional. It was just the illusion of choice designed to make me feel like I had some control over the situation. That was 3 months ago. The deliveries are still coming, and I'm still making the handovers because I don't see any alternative. The commission payments have started arriving too. Always in cash, always left in places where I'm guaranteed to find them. Just enough to make it clear that they're keeping track of my financial situation as closely as everything else. Sometimes I wonder about the other people involved in this network. The drivers who deliver packages without asking questions, the collectors who pick them up without explanation, the clients who pay for services that probably violate dozens of laws. Are they all trapped like I am, or did some of them choose this willingly? What scares me most is how organized it all seems. This isn't some amateur operation run by opportunistic criminals. It's a systematic business with established procedures and reliable infrastructure. The kind of thing that would require serious planning and resources to maintain. And if they can do this to me, a random student who stumbled onto their website by accident, what are they capable of doing to people who actually pose a threat to their operations? I still have the Nokia. It sits on my desk, fully charged, waiting for the next call. Sometimes I think about smashing it, or throwing it away, or just running as far from Manchester as I can get. But I know it wouldn't make any difference. They've got my details now, my routines, my weaknesses, my family connections. Whether I keep cooperating or try to escape, I'll always be part of their system in some way. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there, other people are receiving their first mysterious parcel, probably telling themselves it's just a mistake or a harmless prank, not realizing they've just become part of something much darker than they could imagine. What would you say if I told you that taking care of an elderly person could lead to becoming the star of a dark web murder broadcast? 4 months ago, I was just a care worker in Sheffield, trying to pay off my student loans and build some experience before applying to nursing school. Now I'm hiding in a service station outside York, and tomorrow night thousands of people are going to watch me become the entertainment in a red room that I helped set up without realizing what I was doing. I work for a private care agency that provides live-in support for elderly clients who want to remain in their own homes rather than move to residential facilities. It's demanding work, 12-hour shifts, difficult clients, family members who expect miracles, but it pays better than most jobs available to someone with just A-levels and a care certificate. The assignment that changed everything started in late September. I was assigned to provide overnight care for a man named Arthur Henley, an 80-year-old former academic living alone in a large Victorian house in Crooks. Mr. Henley had early-stage dementia and required supervision during the night, as he had a tendency to wander and had fallen several times trying to navigate his house in the dark. The house was impressive but dated, 3 stories, original features, and a basement that Mr. Henley used for storage. He'd been a professor of computer science at Sheffield University before retiring. and the house was filled with books, academic papers, and what appeared to be decades of accumulated technology. Old computers, servers, and networking equipment were scattered throughout various rooms. Mr. Henley was polite but distant during my first few weeks on the assignment. His dementia seemed relatively mild, occasional confusion about dates or names, some difficulty with complex tasks, but generally coherent and self-sufficient during daylight hours. He maintained a regular routine of reading, light gardening, and what he called his research projects in the basement. My role was primarily supervisory, ensuring he didn't wander outside at night, helping if he became confused or distressed, and managing his medication schedule. During the day, Mr. Henley was largely independent, so I had considerable downtime to study for my nursing school applications or catch up on personal tasks. About a month into the assignment, I started noticing some unusual aspects of Mr. Henley's routine. He received frequent deliveries of computer equipment, always paying in cash and insisting on handling the transactions personally. When I asked about his continued interest in technology, he explained that he was working on research projects related to his former academic work. Mr. Henley also had visitors at odd hours, usually late in the evening or very early in the morning. These weren't social calls from friends or family, but business-like meetings with younger people who would arrive with equipment or documents. When I asked about these visits, Mr. Henley explained that he was consulting on technical projects for former colleagues. The basement became increasingly off-limits during this period. Mr. Henley installed new locks and made it clear that his research space was private. I could hear equipment running constantly, humming servers, cooling fans, and what sounded like multiple computers operating simultaneously. The electricity bills must have been substantial. Around this time, Mr. Henley began asking me to help with some of his technical projects. Simple tasks initially, moving equipment, organizing cables, cleaning workspace areas. He offered to pay me extra for this assistance, which I welcomed given my financial situation. The work seemed harmless enough, just basic maintenance and organization. Gradually, Mr. Henley's request became more specific. He needed help setting up camera equipment in various rooms of the house, testing lighting configurations in different spaces, ensuring that recording devices had clear sight lines and optimal audio pickup. He explained that he was documenting his house's architecture and historical features for academic purposes. The camera installations were professional-grade equipment, far more sophisticated than anything needed for simple documentation. Multiple angles in each room, motion sensors, night vision capabilities, and centralized recording systems that fed back to his basement setup. When I commented on the complexity, Mr. Henley explained that thoroughness was essential for proper academic documentation. I also helped Mr. Henley test various aspects of his recording systems. He would have me move through different rooms while he monitored the coverage from his basement, adjusting camera angles and audio levels to ensure optimal capture quality. He said this was necessary to document how people interacted with historical architecture. During these tests, Mr. Henley would give me specific instructions about timing, positioning, and behavior. Stand in certain locations for predetermined durations. React to various stimuli he would introduce. Follow scripted movements through the house while he recorded everything from his monitoring station. The level of detail seemed excessive for architectural documentation. As weeks passed, Mr. Henley's dementia symptoms appeared to fluctuate dramatically. Some days, he seemed completely lucid and organized, managing complex technical projects with expertise that seemed inconsistent with cognitive decline. Other days, he appeared genuinely confused and disoriented, requiring assistance with basic tasks. I began to suspect that Mr. Henley's condition might not be as severe as initially diagnosed, or that he was deliberately exaggerating his symptoms. His moments of clarity always coincided with technical work or visits from his mysterious colleagues. His confusion seemed to occur primarily when I asked questions about his projects or tried to understand what he was really doing. 3 weeks ago, everything became clear in the worst possible way. Mr. Henley had asked me to test a new camera installation in the basement, claiming he needed to document some architectural features of the foundation. When I went downstairs, I discovered that the space had been completely transformed from a storage area into something resembling a professional studio. Multiple camera angles captured every inch of a central area that had been set up with restraints, medical equipment, and tools that clearly weren't for architectural documentation. Banks of monitors showed various live feeds from around the house, including rooms where I'd helped install cameras. Computer screens displayed dark web sites with streaming interfaces and viewer count displays. Most disturbing was seeing my own image on several monitors. Live feeds showing me in different rooms of the house, recorded footage from previous weeks, and edited compilations of my movements and reactions during Mr. Henley's tests. I realized that his architectural documentation project had been recording me extensively, creating content that was apparently being shared online. Mr. Henley appeared behind me, no longer showing any signs of confusion or dementia. He explained calmly that his condition had been largely fabricated to create a suitable cover for his actual work. Care workers were ideal subjects because they were isolated, had regular schedules, and were accustomed to working in private homes without supervision. He showed me the full extent of his operation. The basement was equipped for live streaming to dark web audiences who paid for authentic, unscripted content. The house had been converted into a production facility where he could create material featuring unwitting participants who thought they were just doing their jobs. Mr. Henley's research projects involved documenting potential subjects, testing their reactions to various situations, and gradually preparing them for final broadcasts. The care worker arrangement provided perfect cover, a legitimate reason for someone to be in the house regularly, explaining any unusual behavior or equipment to neighbors or family members. My weeks of helping with camera installations and testing had been preparation for my own broadcast. Mr. Henley's audience had been watching my daily routines, learning my behavior patterns, and anticipating the moment when I would transition from unknowing assistant to featured content. The visitors who came at odd hours weren't academic colleagues. They were part of a network that specialized in creating dark web entertainment using people who had no idea they were being groomed for participation. Care workers, domestic staff, delivery personnel, anyone whose job provided access to private spaces and isolated working conditions. Mr. Henley explained that tomorrow night's broadcast would feature the culmination of months of preparation. His audience had been following my story through surveillance footage, watching me gradually become complicit in setting up the very equipment that would be used for my final performance. I managed to escape while Mr. Henley was distracted with technical preparations, but I know the surveillance network extends beyond his house. They've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements, and building detailed profiles of everyone in my life. Running might delay the inevitable, but it won't prevent it. Since leaving Sheffield, I've been moving between different locations, but they keep finding me. Messages sent to devices I thought were secure. People who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Evidence that my movements are being tracked and reported back to Mr. Henley's operation. Yesterday, I received a package at the hotel where I'm staying. a package containing a tablet computer that showed live feeds from Mr. Henley's house. The basement had been prepared for broadcast, with professional lighting and multiple camera angles focused on the central area where I'd unknowingly helped position equipment. Text on the screen explained that tomorrow's broadcast was titled The Care Worker Series Finale, and that thousands of viewers had been following my story from the beginning. They'd watched me arrive for the assignment, gradually discover the truth about my situation, and attempt to escape. My real life had become entertainment for people willing to pay for authentic reactions to genuine danger. The message included details about my movements over the past few days, demonstrating that their surveillance had continued despite my leaving Mr. Henley's house. They knew which trains I'd taken, where I'd been staying, even what I'd eaten for my last few meals. Every step of my escape had been monitored and possibly broadcast to paying audiences. I could go to the police, but Mr. Henley has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in his dark web activities. Surveillance footage of me helping install cameras, testing equipment, and following his instructions could be edited to support a narrative of voluntary cooperation rather than unwitting assistance. The care agency would have records of my assignment to Mr. Henley's house, my regular presence there, and my involvement in his technical projects. Without context, my actions would appear to show someone knowingly participating in the preparation of illegal streaming equipment. Mr. Henley's operation is too sophisticated, too well established, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The dementia diagnosis provides perfect cover for his activities. Who would suspect an elderly man with cognitive decline of running a complex dark web broadcasting network? Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the Care Worker series. They've paid to see someone whose job involves protecting vulnerable people become vulnerable themselves. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Mr. Henley's audience. I'm writing this from a service station toilet because it's the only place where I can't see any obvious surveillance equipment. But I know they're still watching somehow. The tablet shows real-time updates about my location and activities, suggesting that their monitoring capabilities extend far beyond Mr. Henley's house. In roughly 10 hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they've provided or continue running. But Mr. Henley has demonstrated that his network can find me anywhere, and his audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The most terrifying realization is that Mr. Henley's operation probably targets multiple care workers simultaneously. How many other people might be unknowingly helping prepare equipment for their own final broadcasts? How many elderly clients might be using their care arrangements as cover for dark web activities? The care industry provides perfect access to vulnerable workers who are isolated, poorly paid, and desperate for employment. Care workers enter private homes, work alone for extended periods, and are expected to assist with whatever tasks their clients require. It's an ideal setup for exploitation. Mr. Henley spent decades in computer science, developing expertise that he's now using to create sophisticated surveillance and streaming operations. His academic background provides credibility. His age and supposed medical condition deflect suspicion, and his resources allow him to maintain complex technical infrastructure. The dark web provides anonymity for his viewers, untraceable payment methods, and platforms that can't be easily monitored or shut down by authorities. He can broadcast authentic suffering to paying audiences without meaningful oversight or accountability. Tomorrow's broadcast is being promoted as authentic content, featuring genuine reactions from someone who doesn't understand what's happening until it's too late. Mr. Henley's audience values realism over performance, preferring to watch real people discover their situation in real time. I never thought my care work would make me a target for this kind of exploitation. I thought the biggest risks were difficult clients or workplace injuries. I never imagined that helping an elderly person could lead to becoming the star of my own murder broadcast. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so terrifying. I spent months caring for someone I thought was vulnerable, only to discover that I was the vulnerable one all along. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Shift. Mr. Henley's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who thought she was just doing her job. The care worker becomes the one who needs caring for, and there's no one left to help. Right, so this is going to sound absurd, but I've got to tell someone what's been happening to me because I'm honestly not sure what to do anymore. I've always been the sort of person who minds their own business, keeps their head down, pays the bills on time. You know the type. Nothing exciting ever happens to people like me, which is exactly how I preferred it. I work from home doing proofreading for small publishers, live alone in a rented terraced house in Didcot. That's nothing special, but it suits me fine. My biggest worry used to be whether I'd have enough work to cover the rent each month. That all changed about 6 months ago when my washing machine packed up. Sounds trivial, doesn't it? The sort of everyday annoyance that happens to everyone eventually. But what started as a simple repair job has turned into something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. And I keep wondering if I'm losing my mind, or if this is actually as serious as it seems. The machine had been making grinding noises for weeks before it finally gave up completely. Nothing dramatic, just stopped mid-cycle one Tuesday morning, leaving me with a drum full of soggy clothes and no obvious way to get them clean. I rent a small terraced house in Didcot, and the landlord's policy is that tenants handle their own appliance repairs, so I started looking for local washing machine engineers. That's how I found Dave's number, scribbled on a card pinned to the notice board in the local co-op. No fancy business name or website address, just Dave, all appliances fixed, with a mobile number written in blue biro. The sort of basic advertising you see from tradesmen who rely on word of mouth rather than internet marketing. I called him that afternoon and he sounded professional enough over the phone. Said he could come round the following day during his lunch break to have a look at the machine, and that his call-out fee was £30 whether he could fix it or not. Standard rates for that sort of work, and he seemed keen to fit me in quickly. Dave turned out to be a short, stocky bloke in his 40s, wearing navy overalls and carrying a toolbox that looked like it had seen better days. He was polite and methodical, spending nearly an hour diagnosing the problem with my machine. Eventually, he concluded that the drum bearings had failed and would need replacing, but the parts would cost more than the machine was worth. Instead of trying to sell me an expensive repair, he suggested I might be better off buying a replacement. He mentioned that he occasionally had refurbished machines available and that he could probably source something suitable within my budget if I wasn't in a rush. This seemed reasonable enough, so I gave him my contact details and asked him to let me know if anything appropriate came up. He said he'd keep an eye out and would call me within the week if he found anything promising. Dave called 3 days later with details of a nearly new machine that had come from a house clearance. The previous owners had moved abroad unexpectedly and couldn't take their appliances with them, so everything was being sold off cheaply. He could deliver and install it for £200, which was significantly less than I'd expected to pay for a decent replacement. I arranged for him to bring it round the following Saturday morning. He arrived punctually with the machine loaded in the back of his van. along with a young lad he introduced as his nephew who was helping with deliveries. The installation went smoothly, and the machine worked perfectly when we tested it with a quick wash cycle. Dave explained the various settings and programs, then spent several minutes showing me how to clean the filter and maintain the rubber seals to prevent future problems. But there was something about his behavior during the installation that struck me as odd. He seemed unusually interested in the layout of my house, asking questions about my work schedule and whether I lived alone. When I mentioned that I worked from home as a freelance proofreader, he made several comments about how convenient it must be to have such a flexible routine. He also spent considerable time examining my existing plumbing and electrical connections, taking photographs with his phone supposedly, to ensure he had the right fittings for future reference. This seemed professional enough, but he photographed more than just the utility connections. I noticed him capturing images of my kitchen layout, the view from my windows, and even the contents of some cupboards while he was checking pipework. At the time, I assumed this was just thoroughness on his part. Some tradesmen are very methodical about documenting their work, and Dave had been professional in every other respect. It was only later that I started questioning his motives for gathering so much information about my living arrangements. The first sign that something wasn't right came about 2 weeks after the installation. I started receiving marketing calls from companies I'd never heard of, all offering services that seemed remarkably well tailored to my specific circumstances. There were calls about home security systems that would be ideal for someone living alone in a terraced house. Offers of broadband upgrades that mentioned my work from home situation, despite the fact that I'd never discussed my internet usage with any service providers. Even unsolicited quotes for household insurance that included specific details about my property layout and contents. The callers knew too much about my personal circumstances for this to be coincidental marketing. Someone had provided them with detailed information about my living situation, work arrangements, and daily routine. I started paying attention to other changes in my routine that had occurred since Dave's visit. I'd been receiving more posts addressed to previous occupants of my house, including bank statements and official documents that suggested someone was using my address for financial services I'd never heard of. There had also been several instances of people knocking on my door asking for directions or claiming to be conducting surveys, but their questions seemed more focused on confirming my identity and schedule than gathering general information. Most concerning was a pattern of minor problems with services and deliveries. My internet connection had become unreliable. My post was being delivered at inconsistent times, and I'd received several packages that I hadn't ordered, but which contained items that were obviously intended for someone monitoring my daily activities. These packages contained things like small electronic devices, camera equipment, and recording equipment that had no obvious legitimate purpose for someone in my circumstances. I began to suspect that Dave's visit had been more than a simple appliance repair and replacement operation. Looking back at his behavior during the installation, I realized that his questions about my routine and his extensive photography of my property had been systematic rather than casual. He'd been gathering intelligence about my living situation for reasons that had nothing to do with washing machine maintenance. I tried to contact him using the mobile number from his original advertisement, but it was no longer in service. The card had disappeared from the co-op notice board, and none of the local appliance repair businesses I contacted had heard of anyone called Dave operating in the area. He'd vanished completely, leaving only the washing machine and the growing evidence that my personal information was being circulated among people with unknown motives for wanting detailed intelligence about my daily life. I started researching similar cases online, looking for information about tradesmen who used service calls as opportunities to gather personal information for identity theft or other criminal purposes. What I found suggested this was a more common problem than I'd realized, but the cases I discovered seemed to focus on financial fraud rather than the comprehensive surveillance I was experiencing. Following various leads and references led me into online communities where people discussed more sophisticated forms of personal intelligence gathering. Some of these communities operated through private channels that required special access methods to reach. Eventually, I found myself exploring parts of the internet that exist beyond normal search engines. What I discovered was that Dave hadn't been working alone, and his operation wasn't focused on traditional financial fraud. The platforms I accessed contained extensive databases of personal information about ordinary people, organized by location, lifestyle, and vulnerability factors. My own details were there, listed under a section that seemed to specialize in people who lived alone and worked from home. The information was remarkably comprehensive, including not just the basic details Dave had observed during his visit, but additional intelligence that had been gathered through other methods. Details about my work clients, my financial situation, my social relationships, and my daily routine that could only have been obtained through systematic monitoring of my activities. But this wasn't a passive database. It was an active marketplace where detailed personal information was being sold to buyers with specific requirements. The platform operated like a sophisticated customer service operation, with different categories of information available at various price points. Basic profiles cost relatively small amounts, but comprehensive intelligence packages that included real-time monitoring and regular updates were priced at several £1,000s. Dave's role had been what they called primary access acquisition, gaining entry to target properties under legitimate pretexts and gathering initial intelligence that could then be developed through other methods. The washing machine replacement had been a perfect cover for conducting a thorough survey of my living situation while establishing credibility for future contact. But the operation didn't stop with Dave's visit. The information he'd gathered had been used to coordinate a comprehensive monitoring program that involved multiple people and various surveillance methods. The marketing calls, the misdirected post, the unexpected deliveries. All of this had been part of a systematic intelligence gathering operation designed to build a complete picture of my daily life and personal circumstances. The buyers for this information weren't necessarily planning traditional crimes like burglary or identity theft. Many seemed to be purchasing personal intelligence for psychological reasons that were harder to understand, but potentially more disturbing. There were discussion threads about clients who used the gathered information to create elaborate fantasies about their relationships with the surveillance targets. They would study the intelligence reports in obsessive detail, learning intimate facts about strangers' daily routines and personal habits. Some took this further, using the information to engineer coincidental encounters with their targets, or to insert themselves into their daily routines through carefully planned interactions. Others seemed content to simply observe from a distance, knowing that they had access to private information about people who remained completely unaware they were being monitored. But the most disturbing category of buyers were those who used the personal intelligence as preparation for what they called direct engagement activities. These clients were purchasing comprehensive information about specific individuals as groundwork for more serious interventions that required detailed knowledge of their targets' vulnerabilities and daily routines. Reading through the client testimonials and service reviews, I began to understand that Dave's visit had been the beginning of a much larger operation that was still ongoing. The monitoring hadn't stopped when he'd completed the washing machine installation. It had simply moved to more subtle methods that were harder to detect, but potentially more invasive than his initial intelligence gathering. My internet activities were being tracked, my phone calls were being monitored, and my daily movements were being documented through methods I couldn't identify, but which provided whoever was watching me with real-time information about my activities and whereabouts. The evidence was in the precision of the marketing calls and unsolicited approaches I'd been receiving. The callers knew not just my basic personal details, but also my current mood, my recent purchases, and even my immediate plans for the day. They were accessing information that could only be obtained through comprehensive surveillance of my digital communications and physical activities. I realized that the washing machine Dave had installed probably contained monitoring equipment that was providing ongoing access to my home network and personal devices. The machine was connected to my Wi-Fi for diagnostic purposes, and it would be relatively simple to use that connection for unauthorized data collection. But I also suspected that my property had been accessed again since Dave's visit, probably to install additional surveillance equipment in locations where it would be virtually undetectable. The pattern of minor service problems I'd been experiencing, internet outages, delivery issues, unexpected correspondence, could all be explained as methods for testing and maintaining surveillance systems that had been installed throughout my property. I was living in a house that had been comprehensively compromised by people who were monitoring my every activity and selling that information to anonymous buyers with unknown motivations. The realization made me physically sick, but it also explained why I'd been feeling increasingly paranoid and anxious over the past few months. My subconscious had been picking up on signs of surveillance that my rational mind had dismissed as coincidence. I started paying closer attention to my environment, looking for evidence of the monitoring equipment I now knew had been installed throughout my property. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. There were small cameras concealed in light fittings and smoke detectors, audio recording devices hidden in electrical outlets, and monitoring equipment built into appliances I'd assumed were legitimate. The washing machine Dave had installed was certainly part of the surveillance network, but it was just one component in a comprehensive monitoring system that covered every room in my house. They could see and hear everything I did, 24 hours a day, and they were presumably sharing that information with the clients who had purchased access to my personal intelligence profile. But discovering the surveillance equipment didn't provide any obvious path toward removing it or escaping from their monitoring network. The devices were professionally installed and integrated into my property's essential systems in ways that would make removal virtually impossible without completely rewiring the house. Even if I could identify and disable all the obvious surveillance equipment, there were probably backup systems and remote monitoring methods that would maintain their access to my personal information. More troubling was the realization that moving to a different property wouldn't solve the problem. The intelligence they'd gathered about my routine, preferences, and behavior patterns would allow them to re-establish surveillance wherever I relocated. They knew me well enough to predict my actions and could simply repeat Dave's initial approach with whatever cover story seemed most appropriate for my new circumstances. I was trapped in a surveillance network that had been designed to be inescapable once the initial intelligence gathering had been completed. The only way to stop the monitoring would be to somehow identify and confront the people operating the network, but they remained completely anonymous and operated through platforms that were designed to protect their identities. I could report the surveillance to the police, but what evidence could I provide beyond my suspicions about a washing machine repair that had seemed legitimate at the time? The monitoring equipment had been professionally concealed, and the intelligence marketplace operated through channels that would be virtually impossible for authorities to investigate. Even if I could prove that surveillance was taking place, the operators could simply claim it was legitimate research or marketing activity. The information they were gathering and selling wasn't necessarily illegal. It was just comprehensively invasive. I've been living with this knowledge for 3 months now, trying to maintain normal routines, while knowing that everything I do is being monitored and potentially shared with anonymous buyers who might have any number of motivations for wanting detailed access to my private life. The psychological pressure is worse than any physical threat could be. Knowing that your most private moments are being observed and commodified creates a level of paranoia that makes normal life almost impossible to maintain. But I've also started to notice changes in my circumstances that suggest the monitoring operation is moving to a new phase. People have begun approaching me in public places, engaging in conversations that demonstrate surprising knowledge about my personal interests and daily routine. Shop assistants who know details about my purchasing habits that they shouldn't have access to. Neighbors who seem unusually interested in my work schedule and social relationships. Even delivery drivers and service technicians who visit my property seem to know more about my circumstances than their professional roles should require. I'm surrounded by people who have access to intimate details about my private life, while I remain ignorant of their true motivations for engaging with me. The surveillance network hasn't just been monitoring me, it's been building a comprehensive profile that can be used to engineer social interactions and manipulate my daily environment in ways that remain virtually undetectable. I think they're preparing for something that requires more direct access than remote surveillance can provide. Yesterday, I received a call from someone claiming to be Dave's business partner, explaining that they needed to perform routine maintenance on the washing machine he'd installed. They offered to come round this weekend to check the connections and update the software systems. I know this is the next phase of whatever operation began with Dave's initial visit 6 months ago. But I also know that refusing the appointment would only confirm their assessment that I've become aware of their surveillance activities, which might accelerate whatever they're planning to do next. Sometimes the only choice available is between cooperating with people who are exploiting you or resisting them in ways that might make your situation even worse. I'm going to let them into my house this weekend because I don't think I have any realistic alternative. But I wanted to document what I've learned in case something happens to me, or in case my behavior suddenly changes in ways that concern people who know me. If you're reading this, be careful about letting tradesmen into your home, especially ones who seem unusually interested in your personal circumstances, or who ask more questions than their work requires. Dave is probably still out there, looking for new targets and gathering intelligence for clients who remain completely anonymous, but definitely aren't benign. Your washing machine breaking down might seem like a minor inconvenience, but it could be the beginning of something much worse than you ever imagined possible. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I used to fix old family photographs for money, and some of the images people wanted restored were definitely not family pictures. I'd always been good with digital art software, not professionally trained or anything, just someone who'd grown up messing about with Photoshop and had developed a decent eye for color correction and image repair. My flatmate mentioned that her gran had boxes of old photographs that were fading or damaged, and wondered if there was anyone who could fix them digitally. I offered to have a go, partly because I was curious about the technical challenge and partly because I was perpetually skint and thought it might lead to some paid work. The results were better than I'd expected. I managed to restore color to faded wedding photos and repair tears in pictures that had genuine sentimental value. More importantly, my flatmates' family were delighted and willing to pay reasonable money for the service. Word spread quickly among families who had accumulated decades of photographs that were deteriorating in storage. Most people had precious memories slowly fading away in albums and shoeboxes, but professional restoration services were expensive and often had waiting lists of several months. I started advertising photo restoration through local classified ads and university notice boards, offering to repair damaged images for about half what commercial services charged. The work was satisfying and fitted well around my studies. I could work on images during evenings and weekends while building up useful digital art skills. Most clients were exactly what you'd expect. Older people wanting to preserve family memories, couples restoring wedding photographs, parents fixing damaged pictures of their children. Straightforward work that involved removing scratches, adjusting faded colors, and occasionally reconstructing small damaged areas using content from other parts of the image. But after a few months, I started receiving requests through more unusual channels. Instead of local recommendations or university advertising, people began contacting me through anonymous email addresses and online platforms that specialized in discrete services. These clients offered significantly higher payments for restoration work, often several times what I charge for normal family photographs. They explained that they had valuable historical images or sensitive personal photographs that required professional quality restoration but couldn't be handled through commercial services for privacy reasons. The first few assignments seemed legitimate enough. Historical photographs that appeared to be from private collections, possibly valuable enough to justify the premium prices and confidentiality requirements. The technical challenges were more complex than family snapshots, but the work itself was similar to what I'd been doing for other clients. However, I gradually began noticing things about these high-paying assignments that made me uncomfortable. Some photographs showed people in situations that didn't seem consistent with normal historical documentation or family photography. Images that appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge, often in private locations where photography wouldn't normally be permitted. Other images contained content that seemed deliberately obscured or damaged in ways that suggested someone had tried to prevent the photographs from being useful as evidence or identification. Faces that had been scratched out, backgrounds that had been chemically treated to remove details, even physical damage that appeared to have been inflicted intentionally rather than through normal aging. When I asked clients about the context of these unusual images, they typically claimed the photographs were part of private collections or family archives that required discretion due to the prominence or sensitivity of the people depicted. But as I worked on more of these assignments, I started recognizing patterns that suggested the images weren't legitimate, historical photographs at all. Many showed recent locations and modern details that contradicted claims about their age and historical significance. Others contained evidence of digital manipulation that predated my restoration work, suggesting they'd been deliberately altered before being submitted for further modification. Most concerning were images that appeared to show people in distress or dangerous situations. Photographs that looked like they might have been taken during crimes or other illegal activities, with the restoration work focused on making faces and identifying details clearer rather than simply repairing age damage. I began to suspect that some clients were using my restoration services to enhance evidence of criminal activities or to prepare images for blackmail and extortion purposes. The technical skills I developed for repairing family photographs were being used to make incriminating or exploitative images more useful for people who specialized in harming others. but the money was substantial enough to cover most of my university expenses, and I convinced myself that I was just providing technical services without knowledge of how the restored images would eventually be used. When I tried to research some of the clients who had submitted unusual photographs, I found that most were using anonymous contact methods and temporary email addresses that made them impossible to trace or verify. The payment methods they used were also designed to maintain anonymity, involving cash transfers and prepaid cards that left no permanent records connecting them to the restoration work. Some clients had submitted multiple batches of photographs over time, suggesting they were involved in ongoing activities that regularly generated images requiring professional enhancement. The volume and consistency implied systematic operations rather than occasional private requests. I started paying closer attention to the specific types of restoration work being requested and the techniques that clients wanted me to use on their images. Many requests involved enhancing details that would be useful for identification or evidence purposes, making faces clearer, improving the visibility of text or documents in backgrounds, even adjusting lighting and contrast to reveal information that had been hidden in shadows or poor exposure. Other assignments involved removing or obscuring details that might complicate the use of images for illegal purposes, eliminating identifying marks from locations, removing evidence of dates or times when photographs had been taken, even altering backgrounds to make images appear to have been taken in different places. The restoration work was essentially image manipulation, designed to make photographs more useful for criminal activities, while removing details that might help law enforcement or victims identify when and where the images had been created. I was unknowingly providing professional quality technical support for operations that relied on photographic evidence to facilitate blackmail, exploitation, and other serious crimes. But extricating myself from these high-paying assignments wasn't straightforward. The clients who submitted unusual photographs often returned with additional work, suggesting they were satisfied with my technical skills and discretion. Some began requesting rush jobs with premium payments, emphasizing the time-sensitive nature of their requirements and the importance of maintaining absolute confidentiality about the restoration work. When I tried to decline certain assignments or reduce my availability for this type of work, several clients expressed disappointment and offered substantially higher payments to ensure my continued services. The pressure to maintain my involvement felt excessive for people who were supposedly just seeking technical assistance with private photograph collections. I tried to research whether other photo restoration services had experienced similar requests for unusual or potentially illegal image enhancement work. What I found was that criminal organizations regularly used legitimate photo editing services to prepare images for various illegal purposes, often targeting freelance operators who worked independently and maintained less rigorous oversight of client requirements. The technical skills required for photo restoration were identical to those needed for sophisticated image manipulation and evidence tampering, making it easy for criminals to obtain professional quality services through seemingly innocent channels. I realized that my restoration business had probably been targeted specifically because I operated independently, charged reasonable rates, and had demonstrated both technical competence and willingness to work with anonymous clients who paid well for discretionary services. But understanding the criminal nature of some assignments didn't immediately resolve my situation. I'd already completed restoration work on dozens of images that might have been used to facilitate serious crimes against innocent people. Even if I'd been unaware of how the enhanced photographs would be used, my technical expertise had contributed to making harmful activities more effective and harder to detect or prosecute. The clients who had submitted criminal photographs also had detailed knowledge of my personal circumstances, payment methods, and technical capabilities, information that could be used to ensure my continued cooperation, or to implicate me in their illegal activities if I tried to withdraw my services. When I attempted to stop accepting assignments that seemed potentially criminal, I discovered that determining which photographs were legitimate and which were connected to illegal activities was often impossible based solely on image content. Many criminal photographs appeared innocuous without context, while some legitimate historical images contained disturbing content that reflected the circumstances of their original creation, rather than contemporary illegal activities. The ambiguity made it difficult to establish clear boundaries around acceptable work without potentially losing all the high-paying assignments that had been covering my university expenses. Meanwhile, new clients continued to contact me with requests for restoration work, often specifically mentioning my reputation for quality results and discretion with sensitive historical materials. The referral pattern suggested that my services were being recommended within communities that specialized in activities requiring professional image enhancement for illegal purposes. I was probably being systematically recruited by criminal organizations that needed reliable technical support for operations involving photographic evidence, blackmail materials, and other image-based crimes. The photo restoration skills I developed for preserving family memories had instead made me a valuable asset for people who specialized in exploiting and harming others through sophisticated manipulation of visual evidence. But the most disturbing realization was that legitimate photo restoration services were probably being infiltrated by similar criminal recruitment efforts, making it difficult for anyone offering technical services to distinguish between innocent preservation requests and systematic exploitation of their skills. People seeking to earn money through freelance photo editing were being systematically targeted and gradually drawn into providing technical support for serious crimes while believing they were just helping clients preserve valuable images. 3 weeks after I'd stopped accepting new restoration assignments, someone left an envelope under my door containing printed copies of several photographs I'd restored, along with newspaper clippings about crimes where the enhanced images had apparently been used as evidence or blackmail materials. The rain lashed against the windscreen, a relentless drumming that mirrored the throb behind my eyes. 39 years old, a failed business, and now this, ferrying anonymous packages through the sodden, forgotten arteries of this provincial city. My worn hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white against the grey plastic. The van, a rental with a persistent rattle in its exhaust, was my office, my prison, my silent confessor. I once owned a small chain of artisan bakeries. Mark's Marvelous Muffins, I'd called it, a name that now tasted like ash in my mouth. The dream had crumbled faster than a stale scone, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a hollow ache where my pride used to be. Compliance, my old friend, had always been my default setting. Nod, agree, avoid the fuss. It was easier, I told myself, than fighting. Now, it was just easier. The private forum, Midnight Runners, had appeared like a mirage in the desert of my despair. A discreet ad, tucked away in a corner of the dark web I'd stumbled upon during a late-night search for anything that paid cash. Courier work, flexible hours, excellent rates, no questions asked. That last part was the hook, the siren song for a man drowning in his own silence. My first few runs were innocuous enough. Small, lightweight boxes, sealed with industrial-grade tape. Drop-offs in dimly lit car parks behind abandoned warehouses. Pickups from anonymous-looking industrial units. The instructions were always precise, a sequence of coordinates and times, delivered via an encrypted message. I was a ghost in the night, a silent cog in a clandestine machine. The money, transferred directly to a burner account, was surprisingly good, enough to keep the wolves from the door, to make the monthly debt repayments, to buy another week of fleeting normalcy. Then came the wait. The first heavy package felt like a lead brick. It thudded onto the passenger seat, shifting the van's balance. I felt a prickle of unease, a whisper of something cold against my spine. My instructions remained the same. Collect, deliver, do not question. Compliance mark. Remember, just do what you're told. The rain had finally eased, leaving the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and exhaust fumes. The streetlights, sporadic and weak, cast long, distorted shadows that danced in my peripheral vision. Tonight's pickup was an old abattoir, long since defunct, its corrugated iron walls rusting like an ancient wound. The air here was heavy, not just with moisture, but with something else, a faint metallic tang that made my stomach churn. I pulled the van into the designated bay, the tires crunching on gravel. The back door of the abattoir stood ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness against the grey night. No one was visible, just the waiting silence and the rhythmic drip of water from a broken gutter. I clicked off the engine, plunging the cab into near-total blackness. My breath hitched in my throat. This was new. Usually, the package was already waiting, or a shadowy figure would emerge, wordlessly placing it in my van. A low scraping sound echoed from within the building. My heart hammered against my ribs. I swallowed, a dry, uncomfortable gulp. Hello. My voice sounded thin, reedy, swallowed by the vast emptiness. No answer. The scraping continued, growing louder, accompanied by a soft, guttural grunt. I fumbled for my phone, the screen a sudden, blinding rectangle of light. No signal, of course. A figure emerged from the darkness of the abattoir, silhouetted against the faint, ambient glow from the city beyond. Tall, broad-shouldered, its movement slow, deliberate. It carried a large, rectangular object wrapped in heavy-duty black plastic sheeting, secured with what looked like industrial strapping. The plastic gleamed wetly in the faint light. Evening, the figure rumbled, its voice deep, gravelly, like stones tumbling in a well. No accent I could place. Here for the pickup? My throat was still tight. Yeah, Mark. The figure didn't offer a name. It simply walked towards the van, its gait steady, unhurried. The package it carried was enormous, far larger than anything I'd transported before. It seemed to sway slightly as the figure moved, an unsettling, almost organic motion. Open up, the figure commanded, nodding towards the rear doors of the van. I scrambled out, my movements clumsy, my hands trembling as I unlocked the back. The figure reached the van and with surprising strength heaved the package inside. It landed with a dull, heavy thud that vibrated through the metal floor. The air inside the van suddenly felt colder, denser. That's it, the figure said. Next drop is, you know the drill. I nodded, unable to speak. The figure turned and melted back into the shadows of the abattoir, leaving me alone with the oppressive silence and the hulking presence in the back of my van. I climbed back into the driver's seat, my hands still shaking. The metallic tang in the air was stronger now, a coppery scent that made my stomach clench. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The package, shrouded in black plastic, seemed to absorb what little light seeped into the van. It was too big, too heavy, too cold. The cold. That was the other thing. Some of the parcels, particularly the heavier ones, had started to feel unnervingly cold to the touch, even through the thick cardboard. And then there were the stains. Dark, irregular patches that sometimes seeped through the cardboard, a faint reddish brown. I told myself it was oil, perhaps some industrial lubricant. But the metallic smell. Tonight, the cold was palpable. A frigid aura emanated from the black plastic, chilling the air in the back of the van. My breath plumed in front of my face. My destination was a deserted car park on the far side of the city, nestled between a derelict factory and a stretch of overgrown wasteland. The usual spot. I drove, the van's rattling exhaust a frantic heartbeat against the oppressive silence of the night. Every bump in the road sent a shiver through me, a primal fear that the contents of the package would shift, would reveal themselves. Curiosity. It was a slow, insidious poison, seeping into the cracks of my carefully constructed compliance. Each heavy package, each cold touch, each reddish stain, chipped away at my resolve. Tonight, the dam broke. I pulled into the deserted car park, the only vehicle for miles. The rain had started again, a soft drizzle now, blurring the edges of the distant city lights. I cut the engine, the sudden silence deafening. My hands gripped the wheel, then slowly, deliberately, I released them. "No," I whispered, the word a desperate plea to myself. "Don't do it, Mark." But the word was meaningless. My body moved without my consent. I unbuckled my seatbelt, my movements stiff, robotic. I climbed out of the driver's seat, the cold air biting at my exposed skin. I walked to the back of the van. The rhythmic drip of rain from the roof racked the only sound. My fingers fumbled with the latch, the metal cold and slick. It gave way with a soft click. I swung open the doors. The black plastic package loomed in the darkness, a malevolent presence. The cold hit me then, a bone-deep chill that stole my breath. It was like standing in a freezer. I reached out, my hand hovering just above the plastic. I could feel the intense cold radiating from it. My fingers brushed against the surface, slick with condensation. It wasn't just cold, it was frozen. My gaze fell upon a corner of the package. The plastic, stretched taut, had a small tear, barely an inch long. And through that tear, a glimpse of something pale, something impossibly white. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Don't do it, Mark. Don't look." But I had to. The need to know, to understand the source of this creeping dread, was an irresistible force. I knelt, my knees protesting against the rough floor of the van. My trembling fingers, cold and clumsy, fumbled at the strapping. It was thick, tightly bound. I tugged, pulled, my nails scraping against the coarse material. Finally, a buckle gave way with a soft snick. I unfastened another, then another. The black plastic, no longer held rigid, sagged slightly. I reached inside the tear, my fingers brushing against something smooth, cold, and strangely yielding. I widened the tear, peeling back a corner of the plastic. The pale object came into full view. It was a foot, a human foot, pale, almost translucent. The toes curled slightly, the nails neatly trimmed, frozen solid. A choked gasp escaped my lips, a raw animal sound. My stomach lurched, a wave of nausea washing over me. I scrambled back, hitting my head on the low ceiling of the van. The coppery smell was overwhelming now, thick and cloying. My eyes darted to the rest of the package, my mind reeling. If that was a foot, then the rest of the package must contain. I didn't need to see more. The image of that pale, frozen foot was seared into my mind. Human remains. I was transporting human remains. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling a cry. The horror of it, the sickening reality, crashed down on me. My phone. I needed to call someone. The police. My fingers fumbled in my pocket, pulling out the cheap burner phone I used for the midnight runners' jobs. No signal. Still no signal. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of shock. I had to get out of here. I had to report this. But who would believe me? A down-on-his-luck delivery driver, caught with a body in his van. The evidence was all against me. My eyes scanned the desolate car park. Nothing. Just the drizzle, the distant city hum, and the chilling presence in the back of my van. My mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. What did I do? Where could I go? The forum. I had to check the forum. There had to be some explanation, some way out of this nightmare. I climbed back into the driver's seat, my limbs heavy, uncoordinated. I started the engine, the familiar rumble a jarring intrusion into the suffocating silence. I drove, not towards the drop-off, but aimlessly, desperately. The image of the foot, so impossibly white and still, flashed behind my eyelids. I found a small, isolated lay-by, tucked away behind a dense copse of trees. No streetlights, just the inky blackness and the relentless drizzle. I pulled out my personal phone, the one I kept for real life. Miraculously, there was a weak signal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating to the private forum. My heart pounded with a terrible premonition. I typed in my credentials, the screen flickering to life. My eyes scanned the recent posts, looking for anything, any clue, and then I saw it. A new thread, posted just minutes ago. The title, stark and chilling, stood out like a freshly dug grave. A driver available, reliable, discreet. Beneath it, a photograph. A grainy, low-resolution image of my van. My rental van. And then the details. My name, Mark, my phone number, my address. My world tilted. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. They knew everything. They had been watching me. This wasn't some random job. It was a trap. I wasn't just a courier. I was a mark. The horror of the foot in the back of my van was instantly eclipsed by a new, more visceral terror. They knew where I lived. They knew who I was. And they were advertising me. Not as a driver, but as a commodity. A new piece of inventory. My own compliance, my lifelong habits of doing what I was told, had led me here. To this desolate lay-by, with a frozen body in my van, and my own face plastered across a forum for what? The rain hammered against the roof of the van, a frantic drumbeat accompanying the frantic hammering of my heart. I was trapped. There was no escape. They had me. My phone rang, a sudden jarring sound that made me jump. The number was unknown. My hand trembled as I answered. Mark, a deep voice rumbled, the same voice from the abattoir. No question, just a statement. You've been a good boy. My breath hitched. What? What do you want? A low chuckle, devoid of humor. We want you to continue being a good boy, Mark. That package in your van, it needs to be delivered to the usual spot. And then you come home. Home? I croaked. My voice barely a whisper. You know where I live? We know everything, Mark, the voice purred. And we know you're a man who understands consequences. You've seen what happens when people don't comply, haven't you? The image of the frozen foot flashed before my eyes. My stomach churned, a bitter bile rising in my throat. Yes, I managed, the word tasting like ash. I understand. Good, the voice said, a note of satisfaction in its tone. Now, deliver the package, and then we'll talk about your next assignment." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the screen dark, reflecting my own terrified face. My reflection, pale and drawn, stared back at me, a stranger in a nightmare. I was no longer just a delivery driver. I was an accomplice, a silent partner in a gruesome enterprise. And my compliance, my fatal flaw, had finally devoured me whole. I restarted the van, my hands clammy on the wheel. The cold from the back of the van seeped into the cab, a constant chilling reminder of my new reality. The rain continued to fall, washing over the city, washing over me, but it couldn't wash away the stain of knowing, the stain of complicity. I drove towards the drop-off point, the deserted car park. The silence in the van was no longer empty. It was filled with the unspoken horror of what I carried and the chilling certainty of what awaited me. My life, once a mundane struggle against debt, had twisted into a grotesque dance with death, orchestrated by unseen hands. And I, compliant Mark, was now one of their puppets. My strings, once invisible, were now pulled taut, binding me to their macabre game. The night stretched before me, endless and terrifying, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would never be able to unsee what I had seen, or undo what I had done. The weight of it all, heavier than any package I had ever carried, settled deep within my soul, and I drove on, into the inescapable maw of my own making. The familiar coordinates glowed on the GPS, a cold, digital beacon in the gloom. The car park, a desolate expanse of cracked tarmac, stretched out before me, illuminated by the intermittent flicker of a broken streetlight. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the van's engine and the distant wail of a siren, a mournful cry swallowed by the vastness of the night. I pulled up to the designated spot, a faded painted bay near a chain-link fence. My hands, still trembling, cut the engine. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I stared at the dashboard, unable to move, unable to breathe. The cold from the back of the van was a physical presence, wrapping around me, seeping into my bones. My eyes drifted to the rearview mirror. The black plastic package, still menacingly large, seemed to pulse in the faint light. The torn corner, a gaping wound, showed just enough of that ghastly white foot to keep the image fresh, vivid, horrifying. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows near the derelict factory. It moved with a fluid, almost predatory grace. My breath hitched. This wasn't the usual anonymous drop-off. This was different. The figure approached the van, tall and lean, its face obscured by the deep hood of a dark jacket. No, not a jacket. A heavy coat, long and flowing. The figure stopped a few feet from the rear of the van, its stance relaxed, almost casual. "Evening, Mark." A voice, smooth and cultured, floated through the damp air. It was different from the gravelly voice on the phone, yet equally chilling. Right on time. I swallowed, my throat dry. "The package." "Yes, the package," the figure mused, stepping closer. I could feel its gaze, sharp and assessing, even though I couldn't see its eyes. "A rather substantial delivery tonight, wouldn't you say?" My silence was my answer. "Open up, Mark," the figure instructed, a subtle gesture of its gloved hand towards the back of the van. My fingers, numb with cold and fear, fumbled with the latch. It clicked open, a sound like a pistol shot in the stillness. I swung the doors wide. The black plastic, with its horrifying contents, was fully revealed. The figure stepped forward, pausing at the threshold of the van, Its head tilted slightly. A long, slender hand, encased in a black leather glove, reached out. It brushed the torn plastic just above the frozen foot. "Ah, yes," the figure murmured, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on its lips. "You found our little surprise, didn't you?" My blood ran cold. You knew." "Of course we knew," the figure replied, its voice laced with a predatory amusement. "We wanted to see if you were truly compliant, Mark. If you truly understood the nature of our work." It glanced at me, and even though I couldn't see its eyes, I felt their piercing intensity. "And you did. You delivered it." A wave of shame, hot and sickening, washed over me. I had complied. I had delivered a body. I had become one of them. What now?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. The figure stepped into the van, moving with an unnatural ease around the massive package. It produced a small silver device from its coat pocket, a scanner. It ran the device over the package. A soft beep confirmed the delivery. "Now, Mark," the figure said, turning back to me, "you go home. And you wait for your next instructions." "My next instructions," I stammered. "But the forum. My details. You posted them. For what?" The figure chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Oh, that. A little insurance policy. Just in case you decided to deviate from the plan. To ensure your continued discretion." It paused, its gaze unwavering. "You're a valuable asset, Mark. Reliable, discreet, just like the post says." My mind reeled. They weren't going to kill me. Not yet. They were keeping me as a driver, a silent participant in their monstrous trade. The post wasn't a warning. It was an advertisement. For me. "But the body," I whispered, my voice thick with horror. "What do you do with them?" The figure tilted its head again. "That, Mark, is not your concern. Your concern is to drive, to deliver, to remain discreet." It took another step closer, its presence overwhelming. "Do you understand?" I nodded, unable to do anything else. My compliance, once a shield, was now a chain. "Good," the figure said, its voice softening, yet somehow becoming even more menacing. "Now, leave the package and go home." It stepped out of the van, melting back into the shadows. I heard a faint click, then the distinct sound of a heavy door closing. I peered into the darkness. The figure was gone. The package remained, a silent, chilling testament to my new reality. I closed the van doors, the metal clanging shut with a finality that echoed in my soul. I climbed back into the driver's seat, my hands still shaking, my mind a maelstrom of fear and despair. I drove home, the journey a blur of rain-slicked roads and flashing streetlights. The van, now empty of its gruesome cargo, felt even colder, filled with the lingering chill of death. My small terraced house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I parked the van, switched off the engine, and sat there in the darkness, listening to the rain. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic beat of my own heart. I stumbled inside, the familiar surroundings offering no comfort. The scent of stale coffee and old papers filled the air, a stark contrast to the metallic tang that still clung to my clothes, to my skin, to my very being. I stripped off my clothes, throwing them into a corner as if they were contaminated. I stood under the shower, letting the hot water sluice over me, scrubbing my skin raw, trying to wash away the stench of the abattoir, the cold of the freezer, the indelible stain of the frozen foot. But it wouldn't wash off. It was inside me now. I crawled into bed, the sheets cool against my burning skin. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale, frozen foot, the pristine white nails, the curled toes, and then my own face, superimposed over the image, a grim, silent accomplice. The next morning, the sun, a weak, watery disk, struggled to penetrate the grey clouds. My phone buzzed. A new encrypted message. My heart leaped into my throat. New assignment. Pick-up point. Old textile mill, East End. Time, 2200. Package, standard. Payment, increased, standard. That meant smaller. But the payment increase, it was a bribe. A subtle reinforcement of the chain. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the delete button. I could run, disappear, but where would I go? They knew everything. My name, my address, my face. They had advertised me. They owned me. My compliance, once a quiet habit, had become a monstrous, all-consuming force. It had led me down a path from which there was no return. I was no longer Mark, the failed baker, the struggling delivery driver. I was Mark, the reliable, discreet courier, the one who asked no questions, the one who delivered. The thought of the money, the increased payment, gnawed at me. It would clear a bigger chunk of debt, buy me more time, more normalcy, a fleeting illusion of control. I pushed myself out of bed, my limbs heavy, my mind numb. The metallic tang was still there, a phantom scent. I walked to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my weight. I made a cup of tea, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in the storm of my despair. As I stirred the sugar, my eyes caught my reflection in the dark surface of the tea. A man, hollow-eyed and gaunt, stared back, a stranger. The old Mark, the one who tried to maintain a facade of control, was gone, replaced by this new Mark, a puppet dancing to a macabre tune. I lifted the cup to my lips, the warm liquid a bitter comfort. The night awaited, and I, the compliant Mark, would be there, driving, delivering, lost in the labyrinth of my own making, forever stained by the cold touch of what I carried. The rain had stopped, but the chill remained, and the hum of the van waiting outside was a constant haunting reminder of my inescapable fate. I was a ghost in the night, a silent cog in a clandestine machine. Only now I knew what the machine processed, and I was part of it. I'm still not entirely sure whether I should be worried about this, but something about my fitness tracking app has been bothering me for weeks now. I've never been particularly athletic, but during my final year at university in Southampton, I decided I needed to do something about the weight I'd gained from 3 years of living on pizza and energy drinks. Nothing dramatic, just enough exercise to feel better about myself and maybe improve my energy levels for dissertation writing. The campus gym was intimidating and expensive. Running outdoors felt too public for someone as unfit as I was. So I settled on long walks around the city and basic exercises I could do in my room. Simple stuff that didn't require equipment or expertise, just consistency and gradual improvement. To track my progress, I downloaded a fitness app that had been recommended by several friends. It monitored walking routes, counted steps, estimated calories burned, and provided encouragement through achievements and social features that let you compare progress with other users. The app was free and seemed well designed, with comprehensive tracking features that motivated me to walk further and exercise more regularly. Within a few weeks, I was genuinely enjoying the routine and feeling noticeably better both physically and mentally. But after using the app for about a month, I started noticing things that seemed odd about how it collected and used data. The location tracking was more detailed than seemed necessary for basic fitness monitoring. Instead of just recording walking routes and distances, the app was documenting exactly where I went, how long I spent in each location, and patterns in my daily movements that went well beyond exercise tracking. When I checked the app's privacy settings, I found that it was collecting information about my sleep patterns, heart rate variations, and even ambient sound levels during workouts. Much more comprehensive physiological monitoring than would be needed for simple step counting and distance measurement. The social features also seemed designed to gather personal information rather than just facilitate fitness motivation. The app encouraged users to share detailed profiles including photos, personal goals, daily schedules, and even information about where they lived and worked. Other users could see not just your exercise statistics, but comprehensive data about your location patterns, activity levels at different times, and personal information that would be valuable for anyone wanting to track or target specific individuals. I started paying closer attention to the other users who appeared in my social feed and the types of interactions the app encouraged between fitness tracking community members. What I found was concerning. Many profiles seemed designed to gather information about other users rather than share genuine fitness experiences. Accounts that asked detailed questions about people's routines, living situations, and daily activities while providing minimal information about their own circumstances. Some users specifically targeted people who lived alone, had predictable schedules, or shared information about feeling isolated or vulnerable. The fitness community was being used as a recruitment tool for identifying potential victims of various types of exploitation. When I tried to research the company behind the fitness app, I found minimal information about their business operations, data protection policies, or regulatory oversight of their health monitoring services. The app was free because users weren't the customers. They were the product being sold to buyers who wanted detailed information about people's daily routines, physical capabilities, and personal vulnerabilities. I realized that my fitness tracking data was probably being sold to criminals who specialized in targeting people based on their movement patterns, living situations, and physiological information. The comprehensive location tracking would be valuable for burglars who wanted to know when people were away from home. The health monitoring data could identify targets who were physically vulnerable or dealing with medical conditions that might affect their ability to resist attacks. Most disturbing was the possibility that the social features were being used to facilitate stalking and harassment by providing detailed information about users' daily routines and personal circumstances. But by the time I understood what was happening, I'd been using the app for several months and had provided comprehensive data about my movements, health, and personal situation to people whose intentions were clearly not focused on fitness support. When I tried to delete my account and remove my data from the platform, I found that the app's privacy policies made it nearly impossible to completely eliminate information that had already been collected and potentially shared with third parties. The fitness tracking that I'd thought would help me become healthier had instead made me a target for people who specialized in exploiting detailed personal information for criminal purposes. But the most troubling realization was that fitness and health apps were probably being systematically used as surveillance tools to gather intelligence about vulnerable populations. People seeking to improve their health and well-being were unknowingly providing criminals with everything they needed to plan targeted attacks, burglaries, and other forms of exploitation. The data I'd voluntarily shared while trying to get fit was now part of databases that were used to facilitate serious crimes against people who had trusted technology companies to protect their personal information. I stopped using the app immediately, but the damage was already done. Months of location data, health information, and personal details were permanently part of systems that specialized in turning fitness motivation into opportunities for criminal exploitation. After I deleted the app, someone broke into my flat while I was at my regular Tuesday evening lecture, taking only items that matched exactly what I'd photographed and shared through the fitness community's achievement system. Okay, so this is what happened to me, and I'm still not entirely sure how I ended up in this situation. 3 months ago, I was just a postgraduate student in Manchester, looking for someone to share the rent on a decent 2-bedroom flat near the university. Now I'm locked in a bathroom, in a Premier Inn somewhere outside Liverpool, and in roughly 12 hours, thousands of people are going to watch me die on a live stream that my flatmate has been preparing for weeks. I should probably start from the beginning. I'm 23, studying for a master's degree in social work in Manchester. The course is demanding but rewarding. We spend a lot of time discussing vulnerable populations and how to protect people from exploitation. The irony of my current situation isn't lost on me. Finding affordable accommodation in Manchester is nearly impossible on a student budget, so when I saw an advert for someone looking to share a spacious flat in Didsbury, I jumped at the chance. The rent was reasonable, the location was perfect, and the flatmate seemed normal enough based on our brief text exchanges. Her name was Emma. She worked from home doing something with computers, and she preferred a quiet environment for studying and working. Emma was in her late 20s, softly spoken and obsessively tidy. She kept strange hours, often up all night working, sleeping during the day. But she was respectful about noise levels and always paid her share of bills on time. She'd converted the larger bedroom into both a sleeping area and an elaborate home office setup with multiple monitors, professional lighting equipment, and what appeared to be streaming gear. When I asked about her work, Emma explained that she created content for online platforms. She was deliberately vague about the specifics, mentioning something about niche audiences and specialized streaming services. I assumed she was doing gaming content or tutorials. Lots of people make decent money creating online content these days, and her equipment certainly looked professional enough. Emma rarely had visitors, rarely went out during normal hours, and seemed to live entirely online. She ordered everything for delivery, groceries, meals, even basic household items. The only times I saw her leave the flat were for brief walks at odd hours, usually very late at night or very early in the morning. She seemed almost allergic to natural daylight. About a month after moving in, I started noticing some odd things about Emma's routine. She would receive packages almost daily, not just normal deliveries, but items that required signature confirmation and seemed unusually heavy or bulky. When I asked about them casually, she explained that her work required specialized equipment that needed regular updates or replacements. The packages often arrived when I was at university, but occasionally I'd be home to sign for them. Medical supplies, plastic sheeting, industrial cleaning products, and items I couldn't identify wrapped in unmarked packaging. When I mentioned that some of the delivery content seemed unusual, Emma became defensive and explained that her content creation required props and materials that might seem strange to people unfamiliar with her industry. I also started noticing sounds from Emma's room at night, not just typing or video calls, but movement of heavy objects, occasional thuds that suggested furniture being rearranged, and what sounded like construction or assembly work. When I asked about the noise, she apologized and explained that she was upgrading her studio setup for better production quality. Around this time, Emma started asking me personal questions that seemed oddly specific. Details about my course schedule, when I'd be home or away, whether I had family visiting, if I was dating anyone seriously. She framed these as normal flatmate conversations, but something about her interest felt intrusive rather than friendly. She also began showing unusual interest in my social work studies, particularly the modules dealing with vulnerable populations and crisis intervention. Emma would ask detailed questions about what we learned in lectures, how we identified at-risk individuals, and what protocols we followed when someone was in immediate danger. I assumed she was just curious about my studies. One evening, while Emma was out on one of her rare excursions, I heard sounds coming from her room despite knowing she wasn't home. Thinking we might have an intruder, I carefully checked her door and found it unlocked. Inside, her computer setup was more extensive than I'd realized. Multiple monitors showing different websites, several cameras positioned around the room, and equipment I didn't recognize, but that looked expensive and professional. What disturbed me most was seeing my own image on one of the monitors. It appeared to be a live feed from a camera positioned somewhere in the common areas of our flat, showing the kitchen and living room from an angle that would capture anyone moving through the space. Emma had been recording the shared areas of our home without telling me. I confronted her about the surveillance when she returned, but Emma had a reasonable explanation ready. She claimed that she'd installed security cameras after some break-ins in the neighborhood and had forgotten to mention them. She apologized for not discussing it first and offered to adjust the camera angles to respect my privacy better. But over the following days, I started noticing more cameras hidden throughout the flat, tiny devices positioned to capture different angles of the common areas, all feeding back to Emma's monitoring setup. When I looked more carefully, I realized she had created comprehensive surveillance of our entire living space, recording everything that happened when I was home. I also discovered that Emma had been accessing my personal computer when I was out. Files had been moved, browser history showed searches I hadn't made, and my social media accounts had been accessed from IP addresses I didn't recognize. She'd been systematically gathering information about my personal life, my schedule, my relationships, and my online activities. When I confronted Emma about this invasion of privacy, her demeanor changed completely. She dropped the apologetic, reasonable flatmate persona and became coldly professional. She explained that her work required detailed background information about people in her environment, and that my presence in the flat made me part of her operational security considerations. Emma then showed me exactly what kind of content she created. Her monitors displayed dark websites with addresses I couldn't read, streaming platforms that required special browsers to access, and chat systems where users discussed upcoming broadcasts using terms I didn't understand. Her work wasn't gaming content or tutorials. She was involved in producing live streams for audiences willing to pay for authentic, unscripted content. The surveillance of our flat wasn't for security, it was for content creation. Emma had been documenting my daily routines, my reactions to stress, my interactions with visitors, and my responses to various situations. She'd been creating a detailed profile of my behavior patterns and psychological responses for audiences who paid premium rates for authentic material. Most disturbing was learning that I hadn't randomly responded to a flatmate advertisement. Emma had specifically targeted me after researching my background, my studies, my family situation, and my social connections. She'd identified me as someone who would be suitable for her purposes. isolated enough to be vulnerable, but connected enough to generate interest from her audience. Emma explained that her viewers had been following my story for weeks through the surveillance footage. They'd watched me cook dinner, study for exams, talk on the phone with family, and navigate the stress of postgraduate studies. I'd unknowingly become a character in an ongoing narrative that thousands of people were consuming as entertainment. The final phase of Emma's project was transitioning from passive observation to interactive content. Her audience had paid substantial amounts to move beyond just watching my daily routine to influencing what happened to me. Emma showed me chat logs where viewers discussed scenarios they wanted to see enacted, specific situations they wanted me placed in, and reactions they hoped to capture on camera. I tried to leave immediately, but Emma calmly explained that I was already too deeply involved in her operation to simply walk away. She showed me evidence of my unwitting participation, footage of me in various states of undress, recordings of private phone conversations, and documentation of my daily routines that would be embarrassing if shared publicly. More significantly, Emma revealed that she'd been using my identity for aspects of her dark web activities. Communications sent from my computer, financial transactions processed through accounts opened in my name, and interactions with her network that created digital trails linking me to her operation. If authorities ever investigated her activities, the evidence would suggest I was a willing participant rather than an unwitting victim. Emma's audience had been anticipating this revelation for weeks. The moment when I discovered the truth about my situation was itself content they'd paid to see. My shock, fear, and growing understanding of my predicament had all been broadcast live to viewers who found authentic reactions more entertaining than scripted performances. The final broadcast was scheduled for the following night. Emma's viewers had paid premium rates to see the conclusion of my story, the moment when passive observation became active participation. She explained that my background in social work made me particularly interesting to her audience, people who enjoyed watching those trained to help others become helpless themselves. I managed to escape that night while Emma was distracted with technical preparations. I grabbed what cash I had and left Manchester without telling anyone where I was going. But Emma's surveillance network extended beyond our flat. She'd been monitoring my phone, my email, my social media accounts, and my financial transactions. Every move I made was being tracked and reported back to her operation. Over the past week, I've been moving between different hotels, paying cash when possible, avoiding main roads and CCTV cameras, but they keep finding me. Hotel staff who seem to recognize me despite my using different names, other guests who ask too many questions about my plans, messages sent to devices I thought were secure. Yesterday, I received a package at the hotel I'm staying in. A package addressed to a false name I'd only used for one night. Inside was a tablet computer showing a live stream of my current hotel room, apparently filmed from multiple hidden cameras. Text on the screen explained that Emma's audience had been following my escape attempt and were eager to see the conclusion of my story. The message included details about my movements over the past week, demonstrating that their surveillance had been comprehensive despite my attempts at evasion. They knew which trains I'd taken, which hotels I'd stayed in, even which restaurants I'd eaten at. Every step of my escape had been monitored and broadcast to paying viewers. Tonight's broadcast is being promoted as the finale of what Emma's audience calls the Social Worker series. They've been following my story from the beginning, watching me search for accommodation, move in with Emma, gradually discover the truth about my situation, and attempt to escape. My real life has become a multi-part series for dark web entertainment. The scheduled broadcast location is an address here in Liverpool. Emma's technical setup has apparently been relocated to continue the production, despite my escape from Manchester. Her audience expects to see the conclusion of my story, and they've invested too much money in following the narrative to accept an anticlimactic ending. I could go to the police, but Emma has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in her dark web activities. My computer history, financial records, and communication logs would all support a narrative of voluntary involvement rather than victimization. The surveillance footage could be edited to remove context and present my actions as cooperative rather than unknowing. Emma's operation is too sophisticated, too well planned, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The dark web provides anonymity for her viewers, untraceable payment methods, and platforms that can't be easily monitored or shut down by authorities. She can broadcast from anywhere to anyone without meaningful oversight or accountability. Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the social worker series. They've paid to see someone trained to recognize and prevent exploitation become the victim of exactly the kind of predatory behavior I studied in university. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Emma's audience. I'm writing this from the bathroom of my hotel room because it's the only space where I can't see any obvious camera equipment. But I know they're still watching somehow. The tablet shows real-time footage of the main room, tracking my movements even when I think I'm unobserved. In a few hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they provided or continue running. But Emma has demonstrated that her surveillance network can find me anywhere, and her audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The show, as they say, must go on. The most terrifying realization is that Emma's operation probably has multiple series running simultaneously. How many other people might be living unknowingly under surveillance, gradually being prepared for their own final broadcasts? How many students, workers, and ordinary people might be unwitting stars of dark web entertainment? The technology exists to monitor anyone, anywhere without their knowledge. The dark web provides platforms for consuming authentic suffering as entertainment. And there are people willing to pay substantial amounts to watch real victims discover their situation too late to escape it. I never thought my social work training would become relevant to my own survival. But here I am, recognizing all the signs of systematic exploitation and predatory behavior that I learned to identify in vulnerable populations. The difference is that this time, I'm the vulnerable one. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Session. Emma's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who spent years learning to protect others, but couldn't protect herself. The irony would be funny if it weren't so terrifying. I've never told anyone this story properly. Not the police, not my friends, not even my partner. They got versions of it, sure, but never the whole thing. I suppose I'm telling you now because enough time has passed that I can finally talk about it without my hands shaking. Though even now, typing this out, I keep glancing at my webcam to make sure it's still covered with tape. It started about 3 years ago when I was working as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm in Manchester. Nothing glamorous. Mostly designing flyers for local businesses, updating websites, that sort of thing. I'd just gone through a rough breakup and was spending most evenings alone in my flat, drinking too much wine and falling down internet rabbit holes. One night, after a particularly bad day at work, I stumbled across an article about the dark web. Not the sensationalized stuff you see in the papers, but a proper investigative piece about how journalists use it to communicate with sources in oppressive regimes. I'd heard about it before, obviously, but always assumed it was just for drugs and illegal stuff. The article made it sound almost noble, this hidden part of the internet where privacy still existed. Curiosity got the better of me. After a few YouTube tutorials and about an hour of faffing about with software, I was in. The first thing that struck me was how ordinary it looked. I'd expected something out of a film. Green text on black screens, maybe some sinister music. Instead, it was just websites with terrible designs, like the internet from the 90s. I spent a few weeks just browsing, treating it like a weird hobby. Most of it was boring. Dead links, abandoned pages, the occasional marketplace selling things I definitely didn't want to buy. But then I found something that seemed harmless enough. A site called ViewShare. The concept was simple. People would stream their webcams for 24 hours straight, and viewers could watch random feeds from around the world. The site claimed it was about human connection, seeing how people really lived when they thought no one was watching. There was supposedly some vetting process to make sure everyone was a willing participant. Looking back, I should have questioned that more. The first few streams I watched were mundane. A student in what looked like Eastern Europe studying at his desk. An elderly woman in Japan watching television. A man somewhere in America playing video games. It was oddly hypnotic, these glimpses into ordinary lives. I started leaving streams on in the background while I worked from home, like having flatmates I never had to talk to. After about a month, I noticed something odd. One of the feeds I'd bookmarked, a woman in her 30s who seemed to live alone in a nice flat, had changed. Not the woman herself, but the angle. The camera had moved slightly, showing more of her bedroom door. I figured she'd knocked it while cleaning or something. But over the next few days, the camera kept moving. Tiny adjustments, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. Which, sadly, I was. The woman never seemed to touch it. The movements happened when she was asleep or out of the room. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she had a cat I hadn't seen, or the camera mount was loose. But then I started noticing the same thing in other feeds. Cameras shifting when they shouldn't, focusing on specific things. Doorways, windows, personal items left lying around. The really unsettling part came when I was watching a feed of a young guy in London. I recognized the area from the view out his window. Somewhere near Clapham, not far from where my sister lived. He was getting ready for bed, going through his usual routine, when he paused at his laptop. He was looking at something on his screen, and his face went pale. He stood up quickly, went to his window, and peered out into the darkness. Then he practically ran to his front door. I could just see it from the camera angle, and checked the locks. He did this maybe 3 or 4 times before grabbing his phone and making a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he was obviously upset. 20 minutes later, the police showed up. I watched as 2 officers came into view, the guy gesturing frantically at his laptop. One of the officers looked at the screen, then immediately got on his radio. Within minutes, there were more police. The guy started packing a bag, throwing clothes in randomly, his hands visibly shaking. Then the feed cut out. I tried refreshing, checking the site, but that particular stream was gone. Not just offline, completely removed, like it had never existed. I knew something was seriously wrong, but I couldn't work out what. The guy had seen something on his laptop that made him call the police, but what? I went back through my bookmarked feeds, and my stomach dropped. Of the 12 streams I'd been following regularly, 5 were now gone, just vanished. The others were still active, but when I checked them, something felt different. The people seemed nervous, jumpy. One woman had moved her sofa to block her front door. That's when I decided to look more carefully at my own favorite feed. The woman in her 30s with the nice flat. I'd been watching her for weeks, knew her routine. She worked from home like me, had yogurt for breakfast, always watched the news at 10. I developed this weird parasocial relationship with her, even though she had no idea I existed. I studied her feed for hours, looking for whatever was making everyone so frightened. And then I saw it, reflected in her bedroom mirror, barely visible, a figure in her wardrobe. The door was open just a crack, and there was definitely someone in there watching her sleep. My first instinct was to somehow warn her, but how? The site didn't have any communication features, no chat or comments. I watched in horror as she woke up, stretched, and walked right past the wardrobe to her bathroom. The figure didn't move. I couldn't look away. For the entire day, whenever she left the bedroom, I'd see movement in that wardrobe. Someone adjusting their position, getting comfortable. When she came back, they'd go still. She had no idea. That evening, she was cooking dinner when her doorbell rang. She looked confused. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the webcam, I watched her go to the door. She came back with a small package, examining it curiously. No label, no postage marks. She opened it at her kitchen table. Inside was a single key and a note. She read it, and her face went white. She read it again, then looked around her flat, eyes wide with fear. Then she looked directly at the webcam. She knew, somehow she'd just found out about the stream. She grabbed her laptop, presumably trying to find the source of the stream, how to shut it off. Her fingers were flying over the keyboard, her face getting more and more panicked. Then she stopped, staring at the screen. Slowly she turned to look at her bedroom door. She knew about the wardrobe. What happened next was chaos. She ran to her kitchen, grabbed a knife and her phone. I could see her dialing 999, backing away from the bedroom, the knife shaking in her hand. The wardrobe door started to open. The man who emerged was utterly ordinary looking, middle-aged, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. He looked irritated more than anything else, like she'd ruined his plan. She screamed at him to stay back, the phone pressed to her ear. He just stood there, looking at her with this horrible, disappointed expression. Then he looked directly at the webcam and smiled. He pulled out his own phone, typed something, and my screen went black. Not just the feed, my entire laptop shut down. When I frantically restarted it, ViewShare was gone. The site didn't exist. No trace of it anywhere on the dark web. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept thinking about all those feeds, all those people being watched. How many of them had someone in their house? How many were in danger? I wanted to go to the police, but what would I say? I'd been accessing illegal parts of the internet, watching people without their knowledge, and I'd seen. What exactly? 3 days later, I saw a news article. A woman in Birmingham had been found dead in her flat. The details were sparse, but they mentioned she'd been the victim of stalking, that someone had been living in her flat without her knowledge for weeks. The photo they used was old, but I recognized her immediately, the woman with the nice flat. I threw up, then spent the rest of the day trying to find information about the other people from the feeds. I found 2 more news stories. A man in London who disappeared after reporting someone had been watching him. A family in Leeds who'd fled their home after finding hidden cameras everywhere. The worst part was the comment the police made in one article. They said the victims had all received packages with keys to their own homes and notes explaining they'd been watched for weeks. The notes contained details only someone with intimate access to their lives would know. What they ate for breakfast, their daily routines, when they cried, when they were most vulnerable. I became paranoid after that. Covered all my cameras, changed all my locks, installed a security system. I moved flats twice in 6 months. Even now, I check my wardrobe every night, look for signs someone's been in my space. I know it's not rational, but I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone is still watching. About a year ago, I got brave enough to go back on the dark web, just to check, to see if ViewShare or something like it had returned. I didn't find the site, but I found something else, a forum discussing it, hidden deep in the network. People who claim to have been viewers, like me, sharing their stories. The consensus was that ViewShare had been a proof of concept, someone demonstrating that they could access thousands of cameras, plant people in homes, coordinate surveillance on a massive scale. The police interventions had forced them to shut it down, but only that specific operation. The infrastructure, the network of people willing to hide in strangers' homes for weeks, that was all still out there. One user claimed to know who was behind it. Not criminals, they said, but someone much worse. Someone selling a service to the highest bidder. Want to know your spouse's every movement? They could arrange that. Need dirt on a business rival? They had people for that. Want someone to disappear? Well, they'd already proven they could get into anyone's home. I stopped reading after that. Deleted everything. Wiped my laptop. Tried to pretend I'd never seen any of it. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my flat at night, I think about all those feeds, all those people living their lives never knowing someone was watching, waiting, planning. The thing that haunts me most isn't what I saw. It's what I didn't see. How many other cameras were in that woman's flat? How long had that man been in her wardrobe? And the question that keeps me awake at night, if they were streaming from hidden cameras, if they had people physically placed in homes, then how did they choose their targets? Were they random? Or was there something that connected all those people? Some reason they were selected? I've gone over it 1,000 times, trying to find a pattern. They were all different ages, different locations, different lifestyles. The only thing they had in common was that they lived alone. Just like I do. Last week, I found a small package outside my door. No label, no postage marks. I haven't opened it. I know I should throw it away or take it to the police, but I can't bring myself to touch it. It's still sitting on my kitchen counter, unopened. Sometimes I catch myself staring at it, wondering if there's a key inside, wondering if it's to my front door, or maybe to something else. Maybe to a door I don't even know exists in my flat. A cupboard I've never noticed, a panel in the wall that looks solid but isn't. I've started sleeping on my sofa, where I can see both the front door and the bedroom. I know I'm being paranoid. I know the chances of them targeting me are tiny. But every time I hear a noise at night, every time something seems slightly out of place, I remember that smile. The way that ordinary-looking man looked at the camera, like he was looking directly at me, letting me know that watching had consequences. The funny thing is, I still sometimes get the urge to go back on the dark web, not to find ViewShare or anything like it, but to see if there's any news, any updates, any sign that the people behind it were caught. But I know that's how it starts. One little search, one quick look, and before you know it, you're in too deep. Because here's what I've learned about the dark web. It's not the illegal stuff that's truly dangerous. It's not the markets or the forums or the things everyone warns you about. It's the things that seem harmless, the curiosities that draw you in, the sites that make you complicit without you realizing it, that turn you into a participant in something horrific. while you think you're just observing. I was watching those people for weeks, thinking I was just seeing normal life unfold. But I was part of it, wasn't I? Part of the violation. Every view probably funded what they were doing, encouraged them to go further. I wonder sometimes if my watching somehow marked those people, if my attention helped select them as targets. That's the real horror of the dark web. Not that terrible things happen there, but that it makes you part of them without you even knowing it. You think you're just looking, just curious, but every click is participation. Every view is collaboration. I still have nightmares about that woman. In them, she's looking at the camera, looking at me, asking why I didn't help her, why I just watched. And the worst part is, I don't have an answer. I saw someone in her wardrobe, saw her in danger, and all I did was keep watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The package is still on my counter. Every day I tell myself I'll throw it away tomorrow. Every night I lie awake, wondering what's inside. Sometimes I think I hear footsteps in my flat, soft movements in rooms I'm not in. It's probably just the neighbors, or the building settling, or my imagination running wild. I'm not the sort of person who usually gets mixed up in anything interesting, which is probably why what happened to me feels so surreal even now. I've spent the last 43 years keeping my head down, doing my job as a council planning officer in Reading, coming home to my flat above the newsagents on Oxford Road, and generally avoiding any drama that might disrupt my quiet routine. My biggest excitement used to be finding a decent parking spot near Waitrose on a Saturday morning. But about 8 months ago, I started receiving packages that weren't meant for me. Not the usual mix-ups you get with online deliveries. These were different. They kept coming to my address, always with my name on them, but containing things I'd never ordered and couldn't imagine anyone wanting to buy. It seemed like such a minor inconvenience at first, the sort of administrative error that would sort itself out eventually. I had no idea it was the beginning of something that would completely change how I understand the world around me. The first package arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by one of those courier services that leave everything with the newsagent downstairs if you're not in. Mrs. Patel handed it over when I popped down to get my usual paper and pint of milk, mentioning that the delivery driver had been very specific about making sure it reached me personally, rather than just leaving it in the shop. Inside was a small electronic device that looked like a cross between a mobile phone and a portable radio. No instruction manual, no branding, no obvious purpose. Just a sleek black rectangle with a few buttons and a small screen that remained stubbornly blank no matter what I pressed. I assumed it was some sort of promotional gadget that had been sent to the wrong address, so I put it in my kitchen drawer and forgot about it. The second package came about a fortnight later. This time, it contained what appeared to be a high-end camera lens, the sort of expensive equipment that professional photographers use. Again, no documentation or explanation, just the device itself wrapped in protective foam and delivered with the same insistence that it reach me personally. I started to worry that someone was using my address for deliveries they couldn't have sent to their own home for some reason. Maybe they were avoiding customs charges or hiding purchases from a partner. It seemed like the most logical explanation for receiving expensive items I'd never ordered. But when I tried to return the packages to the courier company, they had no record of who had sent them or where they should be returned to. The tracking numbers led to dead ends, and the customer service representatives I spoke to seemed genuinely confused by the situation. According to their systems, The packages had been legitimately ordered and paid for by someone using my name and address. The deliveries continued over the following months, arriving every 2 or 3 weeks with clockwork regularity. Each package contained a different electronic device or piece of equipment, always expensive, always with no obvious purpose for someone in my circumstances. Security cameras, recording equipment, small computers that looked like they belonged in a laboratory rather than a council worker's flat. I started keeping a list of what arrived, partly out of curiosity, and partly because I was becoming concerned about the legal implications of accepting delivery for items I hadn't purchased. The total value of the equipment was probably several £1,000s, and I was worried about being accused of fraud or theft if the real sender eventually came forward. But what really began to disturb me was the precision with which the packages were being delivered. They always arrived when I was at work, requiring collection from Mrs. Patel downstairs. The courier drivers always insisted on confirmation that the recipient lived at my address and worked regular office hours. It was as if someone was mapping my daily routine through the delivery process. I tried varying my schedule, working from home occasionally, or leaving earlier than usual for the office. But the packages still arrived at times when I was predictably absent. Whoever was sending them had a detailed understanding of my movements that went beyond casual observation. That's when I started researching the equipment I'd been receiving, trying to understand what it was designed for and why someone might want to send it to my address. Most of the devices turned out to be surveillance equipment, professional-grade cameras, audio recording systems, signal monitoring devices that could intercept various types of electronic communication. The sort of equipment that would be used by private investigators or security professionals, not council planning officers. But there were also items that seemed more sinister. Devices for tracking vehicle movements, equipment for monitoring computer networks, even what appeared to be tools for gaining unauthorized access to buildings or electronic systems. I was being sent a complete surveillance toolkit, piece by piece, by someone who remained completely anonymous, but who clearly knew enough about my life to ensure reliable delivery. The obvious explanation was that I was being set up for something. Maybe someone was planning to frame me for illegal surveillance activities, or they were using my address as a convenient cover for acquiring equipment they couldn't purchase under their own name. But there was another possibility that worried me more. Maybe the equipment wasn't being sent to me. Maybe it was being sent for me. Perhaps someone expected me to use these devices for purposes I couldn't yet understand. I started paying more attention to my surroundings, looking for signs that I was being watched or that my daily routine was being monitored. What I discovered was more disturbing than obvious surveillance. There were subtle changes in my environment that suggested someone had been gaining access to my flat while I was at work. Nothing was obviously missing or damaged, but items were positioned slightly differently from how I'd left them. Papers on my desk had been moved. Books were in different positions on shelves. Even the arrangement of food in my fridge seemed altered in small ways. Someone was conducting regular searches of my property, presumably looking for the surveillance equipment that was being delivered or checking how I was responding to receiving it. I tried to document these intrusions, taking photographs of my flat before leaving for work and comparing them with the situation when I returned. The differences were always subtle but consistent, clear evidence that someone was entering my property on a regular basis. But I couldn't understand how they were gaining access. My flat is on the first floor above a busy newsagent's, with no obvious entry points that wouldn't be visible from the street. The locks hadn't been tampered with, and Mrs. Patel downstairs insisted she hadn't given anyone access to the building. The breakthrough came when I started researching the specific model numbers of the surveillance equipment I'd been receiving. following various technical specifications and user manuals led me into online communities where people discussed more specialized uses for this type of equipment. Some of these communities operated through private channels that required special access methods to reach. Eventually, I found myself exploring parts of the internet that exist beyond normal search engines and standard websites. What I discovered was that the equipment being delivered to my flat wasn't random. It was part of a complete surveillance system designed for monitoring specific types of targets. The platforms I accessed contained detailed guides for using the exact devices I'd been receiving, along with case studies showing how they could be deployed for comprehensive monitoring of individuals who remained unaware they were being observed. But more disturbing was the realization that these communities weren't just sharing technical information. They were coordinating actual surveillance operations against real people. There were discussion threads about ongoing projects in various UK cities, including Reading, where teams of people were using this type of equipment to monitor selected individuals for reasons that weren't entirely clear, but were obviously not benign. My own situation was discussed in detail, with references to the delivery schedule, my daily routine, and even speculation about how I might react when I eventually discovered the true purpose of the equipment being sent to me. I was a subject in someone's surveillance experiment, and the delivery of monitoring equipment was part of a larger operation designed to test my responses and gather intelligence about my behavior. But the most chilling discovery was that I wasn't expected to remain passive. The discussions suggested that recipients of surveillance equipment were eventually supposed to start using it, either voluntarily or under some form of coercion. The equipment wasn't just being delivered for storage. It was being provided so that I could be recruited into conducting surveillance operations on other targets. The community operated like a pyramid scheme, where existing subjects were gradually converted into operators who would identify and monitor new targets. The surveillance equipment was both a tool for monitoring my compliance and a resource for whatever operations I would eventually be expected to conduct. But if I refused to cooperate, or if I attempted to expose their activities, there were detailed contingency plans for ensuring my silence. The discussions included comprehensive intelligence about my personal circumstances, professional relationships, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited to force cooperation. They knew about my mortgage payments, my elderly mother in Swindon, my concerns about job security at the council. They had built a complete profile of my life and identified multiple pressure points that could be used to manipulate my behavior if recruitment through gradual exposure to their community proved unsuccessful. I realized that the months of mysterious deliveries and subtle intrusions had been an assessment period, during which they'd evaluated my suitability for recruitment and gathered the intelligence needed to ensure my eventual compliance. But understanding their strategy didn't provide any obvious path toward escape. They had demonstrated their ability to access my property at will, monitor my daily activities, and manipulate my environment in ways that remained largely undetectable. Even if I reported their activities to the police, what evidence could I provide beyond a collection of surveillance equipment that had been legitimately delivered to my address? The online communities operated through platforms that would be virtually impossible for authorities to investigate. More troubling was the realization that moving away or changing my routine wouldn't solve the problem. They had comprehensive intelligence about my personal circumstances and could easily re-establish surveillance wherever I relocated. The equipment deliveries had stopped about 6 weeks ago, suggesting that the assessment period was complete and they were moving to the next phase of whatever operation they had planned. Instead of mysterious packages, I started receiving more direct forms of contact. People began approaching me in public places, engaging in conversations that demonstrated surprising knowledge about my personal interests and daily routine. Someone struck up a conversation in the queue at Waitrose, mentioning details about my work at the council that I'd never discussed with strangers. A woman at the bus stop seemed unusually interested in my weekend plans and showed remarkable insight into my usual activities. These interactions felt natural at the time, but looking back, they were clearly orchestrated encounters designed to assess my social responses and test my awareness of their surveillance activities. The most unsettling approach came from someone who claimed to be researching local history for a book about Reading's development. They contacted me through the council, explaining that my work in planning would provide valuable insight into how the town had changed over recent decades. We arranged to meet for coffee to discuss their research, and the conversations seemed legitimate until they started asking questions that revealed intimate knowledge about my personal life. They knew about my daily routines, my concerns about my mother's health, even details about my flat and the newsagents downstairs that they couldn't have learned through casual research. When I challenged them about how they'd acquired this information, they explained that their research had involved interviewing various local residents and that my name had come up in multiple conversations as someone who might be helpful to their project. But they also made it clear that they were aware of the surveillance equipment I'd been receiving and that they represented people who could provide explanations and opportunities if I was interested in learning more about how such operations worked. They offered to introduce me to a community of people who conducted what they called social research, using the same type of equipment I'd been accumulating. The work was well paid and involved gathering information about ordinary people's daily lives for purposes that were described as academic, but which obviously had commercial or political applications. I was being recruited to become an active participant in the surveillance network that had been monitoring me for months. The recruitment pitch was sophisticated, emphasizing the intellectual challenges of the work and the financial benefits of participation. They made it sound like a natural extension of my existing job in planning, using observational skills and attention to detail to gather information about community development and social trends. But they also made it clear that declining their offer would result in continued surveillance and potentially more invasive monitoring of my personal life. The equipment I'd been receiving would allow them to maintain comprehensive oversight of my activities regardless of whether I chose to cooperate. They weren't just offering me a job. They were informing me that I was already part of their operation and that my only choice was between active participation and passive subjection to ongoing surveillance. I asked for time to consider their proposal, and they agreed to give me a week to make my decision. They provided contact information and promised to arrange a more detailed briefing about the work they were offering if I decided to proceed. That was 3 weeks ago, and I still haven't responded to their offer. Instead, I've been trying to understand the full scope of what I've stumbled into and whether there are any realistic options for escaping from their network. The surveillance has intensified since I missed their deadline for responding. The subtle intrusions into my flat have become more obvious, as if they want me to know that my delay in accepting their offer hasn't gone unnoticed. I've started finding items moved to completely different locations, personal documents that have obviously been read and replaced carelessly, even evidence that someone has been using my computer and internet connection while I've been at work. But they've also escalated to more direct forms of pressure. My mother received an unexpected visit from someone claiming to be conducting a survey about care services for elderly residents. The visitor asked detailed questions about her health, her daily routine, and her family relationships, including specific inquiries about her son, who worked for Reading Borough Council. My supervisor at work mentioned that someone had been asking questions about my performance and reliability, supposedly as part of a reference check for a new position I'd applied for. I haven't applied for any other jobs, and my supervisor seemed puzzled by the inquiry, but hadn't thought to question it at the time. They're demonstrating their ability to reach into every aspect of my personal and professional life, making it clear that continued resistance will result in escalating pressure on everyone connected to me. But perhaps most disturbing is the realization that my situation isn't unique. I've started noticing other people in Reading who seem to be going through similar experiences. Individuals who appear confused or anxious in public places, who seem to be looking over their shoulders or checking for surveillance, who have the same slightly paranoid demeanor that I've developed over recent months. Yesterday, I saw a man at the library frantically researching surveillance equipment on the public computers, looking up the same model numbers I've been investigating. When our eyes met, there was a moment of mutual recognition. He was clearly dealing with the same type of situation I've been experiencing. We didn't speak, but I could see in his expression the same combination of fear and confusion that I feel whenever I think about what's been happening to me. I think there are dozens of people in Reading who are being subjected to similar recruitment processes, all of them gradually being drawn into a surveillance network that operates by converting its targets into willing participants. The scale of the operation suggests it extends far beyond Reading, probably covering most major towns and cities across the UK. They're building a comprehensive monitoring system using ordinary people who are coerced into gathering intelligence about their neighbours, colleagues, and local communities. The most terrifying aspect is how legitimate it all appears from the outside. The recruitment process looks like job interviews, the surveillance activities are disguised as social research, and the pressure tactics are subtle enough to avoid attracting official attention. Anyone who tries to expose what's happening would sound paranoid or delusional, especially since the evidence is largely circumstantial, and the online communities operate through platforms that authorities couldn't easily investigate. I've been sitting in my flat for the past hour, staring at the contact information they gave me 3 weeks ago, trying to decide whether to call them and accept their recruitment offer. The alternative seems to be escalating surveillance and increasing pressure on people I care about, combined with the knowledge that my situation will only get worse the longer I resist. But I also know that once I become an active participant in their network, I'll be complicit in subjecting other people to the same experience I've been going through. The surveillance equipment sitting in my kitchen drawer isn't just evidence of what's been done to me. It's the tools they expect me to use against whoever they decide should be the next target. I can hear someone moving around downstairs in Mrs. Patel's shop, even though it's well past closing time. The footsteps are too heavy to be hers, and they seem to be moving around the building rather than conducting normal shop activities. I think my week of additional consideration time has run out, and they've decided to accelerate the recruitment process. There's someone coming up the stairs now, moving slowly and deliberately, stopping at each landing as if checking door numbers or listening for activity inside the flats. The footsteps have stopped outside my door. I think I'm about to discover what happens to people who take too long to accept their recruitment offers. The job advert was buried deep in the freelance section of a university careers website. £15 an hour for translating simple documents from French to English, work from home, flexible hours. Perfect for someone like me who needed money but had a packed schedule at university. My French was decent enough from A-levels and a gap year in Lyon. Certainly good enough for basic translation work that wouldn't interfere with my history degree. I applied through a standard online form and got a response within hours. The company, Linguistic Solutions Ltd, specialized in document translation for small businesses and individual clients who needed quick, affordable service for routine paperwork and correspondence. My first assignment arrived by email the next day. A collection of what appeared to be personal letters and basic business documents. Nothing complex, just straightforward prose that required careful attention to meaning rather than any specialized vocabulary or technical knowledge. The letters seemed to be from various French speakers writing about everyday concerns, family matters, travel plans, work situations. Exactly the sort of material you'd expect from a translation service, handling personal correspondence for clients who didn't speak French themselves. But something about the content made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't initially pinpoint what was wrong. The letters contained unusually detailed information about people's daily routines, living situations, and personal relationships. More detail than you'd typically include in normal correspondence, as if the writers were deliberately documenting comprehensive information about specific individuals. One letter described a woman's weekly schedule with minute precision. Which day she worked late when she went shopping. Exactly what time she returned home each evening. Another provided detailed layouts of someone's house, including information about locks, alarm systems, and which rooms were typically occupied at different times. When I mentioned these concerns to my contact at Linguistic Solutions, they explained that the detailed nature of the correspondence reflected cultural differences in French letter-writing traditions. French speakers often included more comprehensive information about their circumstances than British writers might consider necessary. The explanation seemed reasonable, but I started paying closer attention to the specific types of information being documented in subsequent translation assignments. Many letters contained what appeared to be surveillance reports disguised as personal correspondence. Detailed observations about people's behaviors, habits, and vulnerabilities written in the casual style of letters between friends or family members. Others included technical information about security systems, building layouts, and access methods that would be valuable for planning break-ins or other criminal activities against the people being described. I realized that I wasn't translating legitimate personal correspondence at all. The letters were intelligence reports about potential victims, written in French to avoid easy detection by law enforcement, and translated into English for criminals who were planning targeted attacks. But by the time I understood what was happening, I'd already translated dozens of documents that contained detailed information about innocent people who were being systematically surveilled and assessed as targets for serious crimes. The translation work I'd thought would provide simple part-time income had instead made me an accessory to what appeared to be organized stalking and criminal planning on a significant scale. When I tried to stop accepting assignments from Linguistic Solutions, my contact expressed disappointment about my reduced availability and offered premium rates for continuing to work on their most urgent projects. They emphasized that my translation skills and attention to detail made me particularly valuable for their specialized document processing, and suggested that maintaining consistent service was important for building long-term freelance relationships. The pressure to continue working felt excessive for routine translation services. It seemed more like concern about losing access to someone who had proven reliable for processing sensitive intelligence materials without asking awkward questions. I attempted to research Linguistic Solutions more thoroughly and found that while they maintained professional business registration and contact information, there was minimal verifiable information about their actual client base or the types of translation services they provided. Most legitimate translation companies had extensive portfolios of work, client testimonials, and clear specializations in particular industries or document types. Linguistic Solutions operated with much less transparency than would be expected for an established language services provider. More troubling was evidence that some of the individuals described in the documents I translated had subsequently experienced break-ins, stalking incidents, or other crimes that seemed to be based on detailed knowledge of their routines and vulnerabilities. The translation work wasn't supporting legitimate business communication. It was facilitating systematic criminal activity against people who had no idea they were being surveilled and assessed as targets. But proving the connection between my translation work and subsequent crimes would require admitting that I'd been processing what I now understood were criminal intelligence reports, potentially making me legally liable as an accessory to serious offenses. The detailed personal information about my own circumstances that I'd provided when applying for the translation work would also make it easy for the people behind Linguistic Solutions to monitor my activities or take action against me if they considered me a security risk. Meanwhile, the criminal intelligence operation was probably continuing with other translators who were unaware of the true nature of the documents they were processing, gradually building comprehensive profiles of potential victims across multiple regions and criminal specializations. People seeking legitimate freelance translation work were being systematically recruited to provide professional language services that facilitated serious crimes, while believing they were just helping with routine business correspondence. The French language skills I developed through education and travel had instead made me a valuable asset for criminals who needed to process surveillance intelligence without attracting the attention that would come from using obviously criminal terminology or communication methods. But the most disturbing realization was that this recruitment method was probably being used to target people with other language skills as well, creating a distributed translation network that could process criminal intelligence in multiple languages while maintaining plausible deniability about the content. Students and freelancers seeking part-time work were being systematically exploited to provide essential services for criminal operations that relied on detailed surveillance and intelligence gathering to identify and target vulnerable victims. I never completed another translation assignment, but I remained concerned about the possibility that the criminal organization would continue to monitor my activities or attempt to ensure my silence about what I discovered through their document processing operations. The comprehensive personal information they'd collected during the application process, combined with their demonstrated capabilities for surveillance and criminal planning, made it clear that they had both the motivation and resources to take action against anyone who posed a threat to their continued operations. 2 months after I'd stopped all contact with Linguistic Solutions, I received a handwritten letter in French containing detailed information about my current daily routine and living situation, along with a note explaining that maintaining discretion about translation work was important for protecting the privacy of all parties involved in confidential document processing.